The study session of the Board of Education for September 26, 2023 is called to order. This session is being streamed live on PPS TV Services website and on Channel 28 and will be replayed throughout the next 2 weeks. Please check the district website for replay times. All right, so today we're going to have 3 agenda items. One will be the Successful School Survey, the OSAS data review, and I just said it. See, I guess I failed already. No, the board. Oh, Lord. The board budget review draft. Sorry about that. Budget calendar. All right, so we're going to start with the Successful School Survey. So I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent.
Thank you, Chair Hollins. Good evening, directors here and online. At least one of you will recall that in 2018-19, Portland Public Schools began implementing the Successful School Survey hosted by Panorama Education. We felt it was important to begin gathering direct student, family, and staff perceptions of climate in our schools, in our classrooms. We think it's an important source of information. It's critical because research shows that student perceptions of their school experience are predictive of attendance, discipline, and academic outcomes for students. This evening we have our Chief of Research Assessment and Accountability, Dr. Renard Adams, and he'll introduce a couple more guests that are going to help give a summary presentation of our Successful School Survey results.
Thank you, Superintendent. Good evening, board directors, both here and virtual, online. I'm joined tonight by Christina Gillen. She is our partner at Panorama, and she will be sharing the results. This is, again, our climate survey from last school year, so this covers the 2022-2023 school year. This presentation was initially scheduled to occur in late June, but there was some moving of the board agendas, and so we're just getting it back around to it now. So we're really looking forward to unpacking these results with you tonight, and without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Christina.
Thank you, Dr. Adams. Hi, everyone. My name is Christina Gillen, and I'm a professional learning director at Panorama Education. I actually just moved to Portland from the Bay Area last year. Previously, I spent 10 years living in Oakland, California, working as a district-level PBIS and MTSS coach at Oakland Unified School District. I'm a big systems thinker and really thankful to be a part of the team at Panorama, where our mission is to radically improve education for every student. Our team includes former educators like myself, developers, designers, and researchers, and we serve 15 million students in the country. Next slide, please. Just a top-level overview of what we'll review today. First, we'll begin with some context and background about the Successful School Survey, and then we'll dive into some data insights, have a brief discussion, and have some time at the end for reflections and questions. As a reminder here, PPS completes the Successful School Survey annually, and last year our survey window was from January to February. The topics we cover within your survey include school climate, belonging, relationships, engagement, cultural awareness, and more. And we survey grades 3 to 12 for our students, all of our school FTE staff, and our K-12 families. Thank you. Highlighting here the total number of responses across each community group that completed the survey this past year, including 21,130 responses from students. I'll pause here so you can take a look at those numbers a little bit more closely. Then we can go to the next slide. And here we'll see a breakdown of participation across surveys by race and ethnicity. Pause here to give folks a chance to look at those details. And generally, we encourage leaders to review these to see how this data aligns with their overall demographics and enrollment numbers to ensure they're getting an accurate picture of their students, staff, and community members' feedback. And you'll see that this is split up into the groups for each of your surveys, so including instructional staff, your families, grades 3-5, and grades 6 to 12. Thanks. Okay, so now that we've built a little bit of context, let's dive into your survey data. To access your survey data, we'll go to secure.panoramaed.com. Thank you. You'll select Portland Public Schools to view district level data, which is that blue building there, which takes us to our topic level pages. Each topic includes a % favorable score, and that tells us the percentage of survey respondents who responded favorably to a topic or question. You can go one more. And the graphs on each topic page, one more, show us how each score aligns with national benchmarks, and the comparisons page, one more, shows us how topic scores vary across demographic groups from students. Then the schools page, next one, will show us data across all schools in PPS, and one more. Specific scores for individual questions are listed on each topic page. Next slide. All right. We're going to start with elementary student survey topic results. Topics we've identified to focus on are school safety, sense of belonging, school climate, self-efficacy about math, and self-efficacy about ELA. As you see in the topic scores here, you'll notice those % favorable scores in blue. Then you'll be able to see percentile rankings, which show us the how our numbers match up with national benchmarks. And then the final numbers on the right side show us the change since the previous survey iteration. You can go to the next slide. Wanted to highlight some bright spots here because I'm a PBIS coach at heart, and I always like to think about the things that I notice that are great first. So in our data for 3rd to 5th grade students, for the topic of school safety, we see that our responses overall were 63% favorable, but student perception of school safety, specifically for African American students, increased by 4%. For sense of belonging, we also noticed a 4% increase for 3rd grade students in particular. Next slide. We noticed some opportunities for growth within school safety, specifically focused on this question: how often are people disrespectful to others at your school? This question had 37% favorable responses, but you might notice that this sometimes response has the highest number, and that tells us that the shifting of responses towards favorable might be an easier lift to focus on first, and we'll continue to see that as a trend through a lot of the questions that we'll see today. Similarly, one sense of belonging question asks, how much respect do students at your school show you? The some respect response here represents a significant chunk of your students and could potentially be addressed with things like school-wide interventions related to setting community norms around respect. This then ties in with a school climate question. At your school, how does the behavior of other students hurt or help your learning? The high number of middle responses here shows us how smaller shifts could have significant impact. Next slide. Now let's take a look at secondary student data. For here, we'll focus on school safety, self-efficacy about ELA and math, school climate, and sense of belonging. One more. Across all questions for sense of belonging, we noticed a 1% increase in favorable responses, with a total of 34% favorable. And since our N size here is 13,500 students, that represents a shift in favorability of 135 students. School safety saw a 3% increase in responses specifically from transgender students, and all of 6th grade saw an average of 6% increases across all topics. That 6th grade data point was something that I really spent a lot of time talking through with teams during my spring survey results reviews, and trying to think intentionally about how to utilize some of the supports that were going towards the 6th grade students and apply those to other student demographic groups. And we had a really rich discussion back then, and I'm looking forward to continuing those discussions. Next slide. Opportunities for growth here include sense of belonging, specifically, how connected do you feel to adults at your school, which had a 23% favorable response. And paying attention here to that 12% of responses feeling not at all connected, and thinking about what levers we might have in place across schools to support students building relationships with staff. For school safety, we have the same target question as the 3rd to 5th grade. How often are people disrespectful to others at your school? Which saw a 4% dip in favorability since the previous year's survey. For school climate, also the same question as elementary. At your school, how much does the behavior of other students help or hurt your learning? These 3 questions could be all interconnected and, in my mind, could be addressed through universal Tier 1 supports and discussions around making adjustments to ensure that students have conversations about things like community norms, have conversations about how to define respect, what it means in different contexts, all of those types of things may be supportive in moving some of these levers. Next slide. Next, we'll look at our family survey results. Topics of focus here include barriers to engagement, school safety, school climate, and school fit. Overall, family perception about barriers to engagement increased by 2%, highlighting here that the questions related to childcare needs and transportation-related challenges both had high favorable scores. Families also indicated their perception of student belonging increased by 1%, including growth in how much their sense of belonging their child feels at school and also how well activities at school match their child's interest. Next slide. Opportunities here within the family data include school safety and how often families worry about violence in their school. This question saw a 15% decrease in favorable responses since the previous year's survey. Focusing on motivating classroom lessons could be an opportunity for growth in school climate and continued attention to activities matching students' interest for school fit. Next slide. For instructional staff results, we'll look overall at district alignment, district leadership relationships, professional learning, and feedback and coaching.
I think that's for the building leaders.
Oh, yeah. My apologies. Well, we can go to the next slide, and that may be slightly different. Apologies about that. I think I switched a slide around. So the biggest highlights here are a 3% increase in staff positive perceptions about teacher burnout and retention, as well as an 11% increase in perceptions about staff-to-staff relationships. We can go to the next slide. And similarly here to the family data that we looked at earlier, we saw a 12% decrease in favorable responses from staff worried about violence in their school. We also noticed a 7% dip in responses to a question about school climate if teachers are trusted to teach in the way that they think is best. Finally, although we saw growth in staff relationships overall, instructional staff noted there were still challenges in making connections to families. So ideas and supports there would be helpful for moving the lever here. Next slide. I think this one should be right then. Okay. So lastly, we'll look at our school leader results. Topics to highlight here are those same topics as before: overall district engagement, district leadership, relationships, professional learning, and feedback and coaching. Last one. We have lots of bright spots here, but the couple that I really wanted to shout out specifically was that leader clarity about district goals and priorities increased by 32%, and related perception of support for these goals improved by 17%. We also noticed that gains in likelihood to follow through with commitments and overall district engagement. Go to the next one. Leaders also indicated that the helpfulness of colleagues' ideas for improving work increased by 9%, appreciation for new strategies for improving student achievement by 3%, and relevance of professional learning to student achievement grew by 1%. And you'll see the favorable responses on the right there as well. Next slide. Final highlights for some growth opportunities here. So including the desire for school leaders to have more input in decision-making at the district level and stating the need for continued trust building between school leaders and district leadership. Leaders also indicated their desire for valuable professional learning opportunities and increased opportunities to learn from evaluation processes at the school site level. Next slide. If you'd like to access more of the survey reporting data yourself, you can log on to secure.panoramaed.com and click Sign In with Google to explore more. All right, so let's wrap up this time with some reflection and questions. And one more slide, I think, has the questions on it. Are there any clarifying questions from this data that we can answer for you? And how can we potentially connect this data to existing district priorities and practices?
All right, well, thank you for the presentation. Thanks for the presentation, and I ask the board if they have any questions.
I have a quick question about the response rate by race. Do we know if our response rate mirrors closely the number of students proportionate to the number of students?
Well, one of the, that's a great question, Director DePass. We can look into that and continue a follow-up. One of the things we want to be mindful of as we do these and discuss these data is that our students self-identify on the survey, which is different than when they enroll in school. And so you'll notice that there are some racial and ethnic categories that aren't captured in the federally required ones. So there might be a little bit of a disconnect there. But we're happy to look into that for you.
Yeah, just curious if it's proportionate or not. And just also want to make a comment that I noted the increase in the sense of safety for our trans or LGBTQ and trans students, which is a really positive improvement. Also appreciate the very last slide that showed where we could make improvements in communication between district staff and building leadership, for instance. So thank you, Ms. Gillen.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. I would like to also add that schools use these data as a part of their continuous improvement plan and activities. And central office leaders have been very transparent with the data coming from our school leaders. As soon as I saw it, I shared it with the superintendent. We had conversations. We took it to the cabinet level. Dr. Franco and I started brainstorming how we could share the data with our building leaders. We shared it with them, wanted to be really transparent about where they're seeing the challenges with district leadership and where we see opportunities for growth. And we've continued those conversations beginning last May into the school year and are continuing to work on doing things like developing trust, making sure we're clear about what our priorities are, et cetera.
Yeah, exactly. It also looks like the strategic plan was socialized really well in the data that you shared. So thank you.
Do the individual schools and teachers know what came out of their own classrooms?
Yes, they do.
They do.
They have access to their own data. Okay. And principals review. We set aside one of those Tuesdays for professional learning where they go over the results of their successful schools data, and they talk about it quite often.
Great.
Thank you for the question.
What is our, and maybe I missed it because as soon as I saw it, I just started looking at it again. The methodology that we used around getting this out to everyone to make sure that everyone had access to fill it out, time to fill it out, and felt comfortable filling it out.
Well, with staff, we provide time during the workday for them to complete it. We have students complete it during the workday, and we get the message out to families however we can. QR codes, flyers, back-to-school activities, depending, or like not back to school because it was in January and February, Renard. So it wasn't back to school, but at engagements where parents are in the building, sometimes schools set up opportunities and computers for parents to then take the survey while they're there with them. And so we do try, and I heard actually from a couple schools and a couple senior directors very recently about schools that are attempting to be more intentional about their outreach with their families. You know, we can do a lot at the district level, but then we know it's our principals and our assistant and vice principals and our teachers who know their communities best and know how to best reach their families.
And so, similar to Michelle's question, and I know we can look into it, but I'm just kind of curious as to, if we look at our percentage of overall African American students within the school and the staff and all those different variances, and I understand that they self-select, but can we look and see what the delta is from this is what we have, this is the number that filled them out, and then this is the difference, so that we can get an idea of how many voices we're potentially missing, understanding also, all things being equal, that some may have filled out and they just may be in an other category. But I'm just curious.
We are able to do that, and schools are able to do that. Sometimes if there's only a few, like I was the only black male staff member when I was a middle school teacher at my school. In the Panorama survey, that would be under a category called confidentially protected because the number is so low that we don't want to expose someone's identity. So, but there is an extent to which we can look at those data and do. You're welcome. Thank you for the question.
So, Chair Hans, can I jump in?
Yes.
Great.
Chair Scott.
Actually, Dr. Adams, you kind of answered the question I was going to ask. One, I just want to start off by saying this survey is so important. I'm so glad we do it, and I think it's really it demonstrates year to year, how we're doing in terms of our overall school culture and district culture. And the question I was going to ask was, how are we getting this out, into schools? And you answered that. And I guess what I would say, what always strikes me when we go over these results is there are some things that we as a board can do, around, improving culture, but most of the work that's going to happen here is at the building level, right? It's the building leader, it's the teachers, it's in the classrooms, and it's also with parents and the community. And so in addition to everything you mentioned about how we get this into the buildings, which I think is really important, I would also encourage us to really think about how do we get this to our, active parent and community groups, right? So whether that's PTAs or build site councils, so that they can really see what's happening as well. Because again, families play a role in the overall school climate and school culture. And I think all those pieces coming together to really at the building level, sort of saying, where are our bright spots and where are our areas for improvement, can just go a long way towards improving culture overall in the district. So thanks for doing the survey. And again, I look forward to the results every year. So I appreciate this presentation.
Appreciate that, Director Scott. I would be remiss if I didn't recognize Dr. Liz Gilkey. Please wave behind me, who's in the audience. She's on my team. She leads this survey work across the district, and she has worked with Director Will Howell in the communications office, and they have a whole communications blitz that we do and enhance every year. We try to make it better so that we reach more families.
All right. Student director. Student Director Silverstein.
Hi. Oh my goodness, I have a lot to get to. So first of all, on the point when you all mentioned building relationships with staff for students and how that is a really important area we need to improve on, definitely would agree. Within the district student council's first meeting, that was identified by multiple people as an area they wanted to focus on. And then, so you also mentioned like the ways we're collecting them and how there is time provided like during like instructional hours to fill this out for students. And I was wondering if there was like any control or consideration for students who like just randomly fill it out so they can tell their teacher they did. I'll let you answer that and then I can ask my other questions.
Thank you, Student Director. What I would like to say to that, that's a great question. How do we control for people who aren't taking the survey seriously is the way I interpreted your question. And I would say that's done at the individual teacher level, right? We don't necessarily have a mechanism centrally. We could make the survey so that everybody gets an individual link, but then you need a password, and that creates more of a burden and a barrier. And so we try to ensure that the survey is open, and we hope and expect that people are giving us their honest and unabashed feedback.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think that what just made me wonder that was like when we see a lot of like the answers right in the middle. Okay, and then my other questions. So I will just say that students that I've talked to have a lot of opinions about filling out this survey. And so I was wondering, like, is there ever any feedback collected on like the experience of taking the survey? And how is it possible for us to engage with like student groups, community groups, about that and how we can actually improve the survey to better fit the needs of our communities.
So that's a beautiful and great idea. I would love, and we would love, my team and I would love to partner with you to figure out how we could do that. Let's do it.
Okay, perfect. I will reach out. I think the district student council could be really helpful with that.
I agree. Thank you for offering.
That would be really great, and that's especially something that lots of our other clients at Panorama will have student focus groups kind of based on their initial data to follow up with questions just like that. So we'd be happy to support with planning around that too.
Great, thank you.
Earlier you mentioned, like, I forgot which category it was. Sense of belonging, maybe? I can't remember, but you mentioned like tier 1 supports. Are you referring to MTSS?
Generally, when I'm saying tier 1, I'm referring to MTSS, but I think also within that, just talking about any support that supports all students.
Okay. So, I mean, I would be curious about, I mean, you don't have to answer this now, but just like using this data, what has changed practices, like specifics, you know, I think I like to work in specifics. So like if we do have an area where you have students not feeling belonging or stuff like that, you know, and you're implementing, you know, where, I guess I would like to know what you're implementing, but also at the same time, how do we know what we know? You know, for example, are we implementing these things, and is it actually, how do we know it's actually creating positive change? Does that make sense? And again, you don't have to answer this now, but this is something I would like to follow up on and consistently ask about, you know, using this data. How are we using this data?
That's a great question. I do want to, Director Wong, I do want to follow up and say that this is really the work of the principalship. When you think about it, what we do at the district level is to try to provide tools and set conditions, but it's really the principal, him, her, or they, who work to put together practices in their building with their teachers and their educators in order to make the needle move. I've heard from former Principal Lathan about some things she put in place last year, and she saw some improvement with her Black student group and their sense of belonging in her building. I know I've had conversations with Dr. Brown. Oh gosh, I'm messing up Trinice's name, but I've yes, the principal of Markham Elementary School, who his name's escaping me. Forgive me, girl. Thank you, Principal Brown Warrens. Thank you so much, my senior director friends. And she's been talking about the things she's been putting in place to make her students of color feel like they have more of a belonging space and they feel more part of the community. And so these are the kind of individual leadership moves that we unpack when we talk to building leaders when they come in and have their school improvement showcases with Dr. Franco and other senior leaders. It's a great question.
I'm going to start with just like the most basic question. When I go to the link at the end of the presentation, it takes me to 2021 data.
Interesting. It should be defaulting to the most recent data.
It's not. So I don't know if somebody could reset because I can't go to any of the
Yeah,
years.
absolutely. I can check in.
I'd like to look at the data, just comparative, because I think I was the only person on the board who was here when it first was rolled out, and so I'm aware of that, Director Green. So I'd like to be able to look at the actual data, but I can't. But a question I have is just in the terms of usefulness. Thanks for the presentation. I would love to be able to click down, be able to get into the data, because I think one of the values of it is actually sort of the click down and the respondents, of being able to see actually how differently a lot of our students experience our schools and to different questions. And one thing I would ask is, so we had families fill it out, students fill it out. How are they able to access the data, or is it just the data that the district chooses to present to them? I know when I was on like site councils have used it, or principals use it in their school improvement planning, but I'm just curious. We ask everybody to take this the survey, and it seems like I know one thing that's useful as being a community member is is my experience similar to others? And if not, why not? So I'm curious about how, from a larger community perspective, we share this data. You know, who feels safe? I think the numbers are really interesting. They're both what our staff feel, what our students feel, and then is it same across? And what does that mean just for our decision making about the environments we set up as a district? So.
Great question. Thank you for the question. I'll answer it in a couple of ways. One, you asked if the district sort of determined what was shared, and we do not. We truncated this presentation because I know we wanted to have a lot of conversation about our board goals and the OSAS data, but we don't prescribe or prohibit building leaders from sharing as much of the data as they can and want to, and they have access to all of their school's data. They can download a PDF of a report if they so choose. They can open, I know principals who open the data live on their computer in a way that we're similarly sharing a PowerPoint with you tonight. And so there is that ability to do that. At the district level, we're able to compare and look across schools. You're not able to do that at the individual school level, although you can see how you, I believe you can see how you line up nationally in terms of percentiles, if the question is also taken by other schools, which is a relative barometer, but not a perfect one.
Yeah, actually in the 2021 data, which is what I have access to, you can see the school by school comparators.
You have that access,
yeah.
Yes.
But you're saying nobody else has that?
Building leaders don't necessarily see across the district in that way.
Okay.
But central office staff do, and board members.
Okay, so it's up to the principal. They could share everything if they wanted to, like download a PDF and here it is, or not. Is there any particular guidance that we give as a district?
Well, the guidance for all of our data is really grounded in the school improvement plan. So what is it that you're seeing in the data that isn't what you want to be, your state of being, and how do you go about making those improvements and how do you monitor it? And so it does come down to individual site leader choices about what they might focus on. And I know different site leaders take different approaches with their site councils and their instructional leadership team. So I couldn't speak for all 81 campuses, but we certainly work with Chief Buno's staff in the Office of Student Support Services to make sure that everyone has access. We provide access to multiple school level access is provided to multiple school level staff, including our counselors and our building administrators, and we ask them to share those data. And again, it can be overwhelming to look at everything at once, so I don't know how many people look at everything. They may pick a few things that are jumping off the page and catching their attention and share those.
Great. And then just my last two questions. For the district leader data, which I'm assuming is the principals, so you have
you
have families and students, you have school staff, and then you have principals?
Principals and assistant and vice principals.
So, because I don't have access to that data, I'm curious what the district leadership found, since that you're their community, in the district leadership data, and how is that, because there's no school improvement plan for the central office or the district leadership. What things in last year's survey did you look at as this is a place where we want to work on, or we've got some sort of initiative?
Sure, that's a great question. I would love it if Dr. Franco could come down. Because he's put together the plan and the intentional steps that we're taking.
Great.
To, yes. You were waiting for that, right? I hope you were.
Good evening, directors. So back to your specific question, Director Remembrance, I would say there's, and just like with what Dr. Adams said, we are very transparent with the data. We were very specific. We spent a leadership session at the end of the year to actually review very specifically about what our building leaders specifically did say. And we have a number of things that we're incorporating this year. If I were to go back to if there was one thing that we're definitely looking to improve upon, building leaders have a ton of things kind of thrown at them, and so increasing clarity in regards to information and point people. And so we've made the adjustment and created a very streamlined principal handbook, for example, with very specific contact information and point people. I know that was immense. That has led to immense frustration about, who do I contact, especially for new leaders. I think that was a big piece. I would also say too, like, we are always working. One of our mantras is trying to make a big district like PPS feel small. And so with that, creating avenues and opportunities for principal voice, including our strategic plan committees, which we are revamping and re-upping this year based on our strategic plan initiatives. We also have a specific PAPSA group that the superintendent and I meet with specifically. We also, and this is going to be new this year, a principal advisory committee. It lends opportunities for principal voice and then continuing to build that trust piece, which we know foundationally is very, very important.
Great. I guess my last thing would be I'd like to reserve the able to follow up and ask questions when I actually get this year's data.
You mean like at another board meeting?
No, I'll just send them in. But
yeah,
I had questions based on the data, but then I noticed it's like, wait, this is like 2021. I'm not going to ask those questions unless you want to answer them. Who would give me that?
Well,
I want to leave knowing who's going to give me access to the data.
If you could send the questions to me, I'll make sure I round the troops to answer those that will be outside of my scope.
And who am I getting the password from or getting the updated data set?
I will reach out to our project team.
Great, thanks.
Make sure that you get access.
Any other questions? Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Adams, Dr. Franco, and Ms. Gillian.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate you.
All right. Say what? Oh, yeah. So each year on the board, as part of our budget process, adopts a budget calendar for the year. Superintendent Guerrero, who will be presenting this tonight?
Well, we have a couple fine folks that are coming to the table. We're taking a little intermission from two data sets, really important data sets, to talk about our proposed draft budget calendar. Myung Lee, our interim deputy superintendent, being joined by Alexandra Martin from the team.
Thank you, Superintendent. Good evening, directors, colleagues, and members of the community. Great to be with you tonight. As Superintendent Guerrero mentioned, we think this will be the shortest of the three topics. We shall find out. It's up to you. But we did load up on Board Book the preliminary version of the budget calendar or budget development calendar for the fiscal year 24-25 budget. And for most of you, we think that this document will look somewhat familiar in terms of the form and the types of events that are noted on the calendar. For directors Wong and Sullivan, this is similar to the process that has been adopted by the board in previous budget cycles. So for my part, I will just mention a couple of things that still need to be refined, not necessarily this evening, but just to note that are on the spring portion of the calendar. So there is one row on the calendar that says that there is a community-facing meeting that needs to be penciled in, a specific date needs to be penciled in. I think it's noted as something that is the week of April 29th, I believe. And then, sorry, Alexandra, could you help me? Then there's one other event that is around that time, and that also needs to be, I think both of those may need to be confirmed in one respect or another. One of the events has to be a location has to be pinned down for one of those events. And one question we've been discussing is, in previous cycles, my understanding is that that event has sometimes taken place out in the community at a high school. So if that is the desire to, as the setting for that event this time around, then we would just want to be specific with the public at an appropriate time to say when, exactly what time, and the specific location of that event. So those are just a couple of loose ends. We have a little time to figure that out and to share it out with the community. And then, Alexandra, could you just mention the CBRC as well?
We have a couple of engagements planned with the CBRC. You can see in our budget planning phase, we have a work session planned with the CBRC on March 19th. And then the CBRC would attend the proposed budget presentation. This is planned for April 23rd, and this is where we have the location as TBD. And then the CBRC would present their proposed budget report on May 7th.
So just on a process note, as we believe you know already, directors, this is a preliminary presentation of the proposed budget calendar, and this will be back before you on October 10th for a vote and adoption. And with that, we are here to respond to any questions that you may have.
So I have a couple of recommendations. And for anybody who's heard me in the past years around the budget calendar, they're going to be very similar, because I feel like this is similar to other calendars that have been presented. There's less than 4 weeks for the board between when the budget's presented and when we're being asked to approve it. It's $1 billion budget, and I would suggest that we need 2 more work sessions, or need more time, because actually the way, and I think in the past we have added these, but if we get it presented on the 23rd, the hearing is on the 29th, which is really a listening session primarily. Then we're going to get CBRC, and then the next meeting we're going to approve it. I don't think that allows for adequate time for board discussion about the budget. And I would suggest adding more sessions, and also like 3.5 weeks seems like we're not doing our fiduciary responsibility in that amount of time with the $1 billion budget. The other thing I would suggest is that adding in whenever the staffing is going to go out to the schools, since that's the vast majority of the district's budget, that we don't wait till April to find out what the staffing is going to be, that we have a session scheduled around the time when the staffing is going to go out to the schools. Again, once that goes out, it's making some major decisions for the school district in terms of the budget that we're then going to be asked to approve. So those would be my my suggestions for the changes to the adjustments to the calendar.
I've recorded those, and I would just note that we would be providing our proposed budget document, both volumes, a couple of weeks before you would see it on April 23rd, so in line with typical requirements. So it would be, I just looked, it looks like it's a little over 6 weeks before approval.
So it'd be when we get it 2 weeks in advance, it's great, because I think then actually that first board meeting, we can actually use it, and it's not just like something just landed in your inbox. But if we don't get it, then it does make it super compressed, because, for example, we get it 2 weeks in advance, we can get our questions in, and so that first meeting is actually a work session versus the superintendent presenting the budget. So if you're willing to commit to that in there, then, but I still think essentially we just have, after that first meeting, one meeting in which we're having a substantive discussion before we're actually asked, would be the 7th, before we're being asked to approve it.
Doesn't February 20th have a work session?
But that's not with the actual budget that's been that's not the superintendent's not presenting his budget until the April 23rd. And then we're being asked to vote on May 21st to approve.
But are we involved in the work sessions as they go?
We are, but it's not actually the budget that's
Not
been
the actual budget.
presented.
Okay.
It's usually around a variety of different topics.
But we've been knowing what's coming.
All right, we have two other hands raised, Director DePass, Director Scott. So just in order of alphabet, I'm going to call on Director DePass first.
Thank you for alphabetizing me. That usually works in my favor. I wanted to echo the comments made by Director Brim-Edwards and add that I'm really happy to see, by the way, that we have this many meetings. I think we've increased the number of, the calendar's gotten longer since I've been on the board. And to that end, I think that's really important that we're being transparent, and I'd love to see a second meeting out in the community. And I'm toggling between the schedule and the meeting, so allow me just a second. The other thing is that the notice in April going to the Oregonian, does that correspond with some, very active, family and community engagement? So it's not just a little, paragraph in the Oregonian, which, not very many people read, actually. Some people do, but not everyone, but it's probably required. And then I was also curious about adding a little bit more room in the budget so that we could, I found that the CBRC was really helpful this last budget cycle in really helping us look at the budget, what the trade-offs were, and had some very strong suggestions. And so I would love to see them involved in the meeting. I'm sorry, I can't read it very well. Not the meeting that they present, but maybe a meeting prior to that where we're able to bring the community and the CBRC together. Maybe it's the listening session that's scheduled. Sorry, I'm just not able to blow this up big enough. The bottom line is I'd like to see an additional meeting added that the CBRC and the community could learn about, and that we do some community engagement that gets a little bit more participation for those people that are curious about it. Also agree with the recommendation to, when the staffing comes out, to take that into consideration when we're scheduling, so that people have a chance to respond. The community has a chance. Thank you.
All right, Director Scott.
Thanks. I'm actually going to take a little bit of the opposite view, and close watchers of the board know that Director Brim-Edwards and I have this conversation every year. I actually think this calendar works really well. I think this calendar is very consistent with local budget law, which every other jurisdiction, both school boards and non-school boards, operate under in the state of Oregon. And there's some really good reasons for these timelines. I mean, I just want to, we do have a $1 billion budget. I know the city of Portland has a $6 or $7 billion budget. They have a very similar timeline. My understanding is Multnomah County has a very similar timeline as well. I think one of the reasons that I would point out is that the earlier a proposed budget is given, the less accurate the data usually is. There's less spending data throughout the year. There's fewer actuals. It's harder to estimate ending fund balance. Obviously, in legislative years, it's harder to understand what the state is going to do as well. That's not going to be the case in this next year's budget. I also think it's really incumbent on us as a board to deliver our priorities much, much earlier than the proposed budget. And I think the reason why I react a little bit to the idea of giving us more time to review the proposed budget is because it kind of takes the pressure off us to be giving all of those ideas and priorities now. And by now, I mean now in September. One of the things I might add to this would be a fall budget work session sometime, in November, perhaps, maybe early December, where we can really hear both the priorities of the superintendent and staff, but also bring our priorities as a board. The superintendent is the budget officer for the district and, proposes the budget based upon guidelines from the board. And so I think it's really incumbent on us to be getting all of that well in advance, months and months in advance of the proposed budget. That stage from the proposed budget to when we both approve and adopt it is really, there should be no surprises. And in my experience on the board the last 4 years, there aren't any surprises. when that comes. And it should really just be focused on sort of maybe some last minute tweaks and turns. And I think if we are concentrating our review as a board into that 4 to 6 weeks, that's actually going to make the process not work very well. So I actually would adopt this calendar as is. And I would really encourage us to be thinking about how do we communicate as a board our priorities 6 months in advance of the proposed budget being presented to us.
Thank you, Chair Scott. Have any other questions? Comments, thoughts?
So I'm just going to sort of maybe make an observation. So from the budget calendar, I still think I've never seen the board. This is when we get into having meetings that go till 11 or 12 at night, because that's when the time we can ask questions, because we actually have the budget. But I would suggest then also, Director Scott, to your point, is that we be really specific that we don't have, for example, I'm just going to take the November 7th school board meeting. That's right now is supposed to be just the pointing to the CBRC, but that we actually have a discussion about priorities versus an exercise about here's learning about the budget, or we're going to share some data, but having an explicit budget priorities discussion but set as in the fall versus just a maybe a topic on something like here's one topic we're going to educate you about or that we're going to be focused on, but have that explicit budget priority discussion in the fall as well. Because then we can see, like, to your point, so if we have the budget priority discussion, we get the budget 2 weeks in advance, we have an opportunity to look at it, we can look at that alignment. Obviously there's mid-year mid-year things that could impact our thinking from the fall to when we get the budget, but then we've already sort of set that framework, we've got the budget, and then I do think it's more efficient. But if we don't use our previous meetings to talk about the priorities or to talk about staffing, which is always an issue. If we don't talk about staffing in February, then it does get all balled up at the end of the session. So I think it's a good idea to have a very explicit fall priority setting session.
I appreciate the conversation. I guess as I'm listening to it, the question for me always when thinking about resource allocation or where we should propose to make investments is where are we in our strategic plan, and sort of what's the next set of action steps we should be diving into that informs our budget development versus a widely open-ended question about where should we spend our monies. So I agree. I think an earlier conversation will be better to sort of talk about that, at least at a high level, because I do think that should be the primary way that we're informing how we propose to shape our budget for the spring.
Just another question. I don't know if this needs to be on the budget calendar, but we have a very specific role to play with the SIA account. Is that baked in here, or does that have to happen at one of our meetings? Because that seems like a whole other separate thing as well. And if we are required to do it, I would hate to have that one piece of the budget be, this is our one meeting and it's going to be on the grant. So I don't know where that gets baked in, or if that's a separate process and not on the budget calendar.
So my understanding of that, and I'm going to look to my partner here for expertise and validation, but we do anticipate, to your question, Director Brim-Edwards, that there will be a specific discussion about SIA this fall, and this is going to be a blend of programmatic and student outcome data, along with regulatory requirements of the plan, and sort of having an integrated discussion about program outcomes and resources. And that's required by the new law that created the integrated grant framework. So that you can anticipate coming sooner than the overall budget development or the proposed budget certainly that will follow in the spring. And that's a function of the deadlines that are created by the state. So, but certainly the integrated grant resources will definitely be in turn an important part of that overall comprehensive proposed budget conversation for 24-25. So you'll hear about it twice in both those settings.
But most of the work will be front-loaded into the fall.
Would you say that's true?
Yes, we'll have an update on integrated grant in the fall.
All right, any other questions, comments? Director Scott, Director Pash, you guys are good? Director Silverstein, you okay?
Yes, thank you.
All right. All right, thank you both.
Thank you, directors. We'll be back taking your feedback. We'll discuss it and we'll report back on October 10th. Thank you so much.
So next we will be reviewing the most recent data, which was released just last week. Before I pass it to the superintendent, I wanted to say a few words. Over the past 2 years, I have been fortunate enough to come across some powerful statements that have truly inspired me. One such statement is, great things takes time to unfold, and the journey towards success is a continuous process of growth and learning. Another statement that resonated deeply with me is, every day presents an opportunity to embrace change and cultivate a mindset of adaptability. For change management is not a one-time event, but a daily practice. Now, I wouldn't have said exactly like that. So these words of wisdom have fueled my determination and reminded me that with patience, perseverance, and a commitment to personal growth, that we all can achieve remarkable things. In 2022, we had a memo when the last data points came out, and it said, we foresaw these gaps, and we're already working on the plan to close them. This is a collective effort that requires us all. That plan encompassed powerful strategies such as implementing an instructional framework, aligning grade level and standards, utilizing data-driven approaches, embracing culturally affirming practices, adopting new curriculum, and fostering continuous professional learning. Together, these initiatives is supposed to pave the way for a brighter future for our kids. I believe now that the moment to embrace transformative change is where we can unlock our true potential for our future kids beyond their wildest dreams. We have the power now to shape the future of our youth educational achievements. Our children are embarking on a remarkable journey where they will compete on a global stage for extraordinary opportunities and fulfilling careers. Our kids are not just competing with other kids in Oregon. They are embarking on a journey to surpass their own limits and reach for greatness that knows no boundaries. They have the incredible opportunity to showcase their talents and abilities on a global stage. Their livelihoods and mere existence are the driving force behind their unwavering determination to overcome any obstacles that come their way. Now it's time for us to seize the moment. They have no more time to wait. We must rise up and unleash our full potential to harness the resources at our disposal and utilize the knowledge that we know that propels transformation of young minds. We have the power to uplift and empower our students beyond measure, far surpassing our current efforts. There's a quote from Dr. Charlene Williams. It says, "We owe our students much better than we are delivering right now." She said, we have to buckle up and deliver, given the resources that we have and the information that we know to move the data forward. Our children are facing a critical moment, and it's a call to action. Let us work towards a future where every child can thrive. Let us find inspiration and opportunity to make a difference. Together, we must create an environment where every child surpasses expectations and achieves greatness. The present moment holds immense power as I summon every single one of us to rise above, Let us heed the words of the governor who stated, "The results are unacceptable and must improve. We need to pick up the pace." I challenge her to be courageous and pass the budget at the QEM. To our board, our superintendent, district staff, teachers, bus drivers, nutritional services, we must do more. We must be better. We must be bold. We have to be transformational at this time. And that's what, so now I'll leave it up to the superintendent.
Thank you, Chair Hollins. I appreciate your words. I know we share the same urgency and goals for our students. So we're here at the main entree of tonight's meeting, and that's to have a chance to take a first look at this past spring's statewide summative assessments known as the OSAS, Oregon Statewide Assessment System, which gets administered in a couple of content areas, primarily English language arts and math across schools, grade levels, specific student groups. We'll be talking about that. Before we jump into a brief presentation and jump into the more important conversation, I also want to share a few words with your indulgence. So I'll start off by saying, while we are observing instances of growth and improvement in our results, which is positive, we still do have racial groups that continue to demonstrate persistently low levels of proficiency. So like you, I'm not satisfied with any gap in performance between our black and brown students and their white peers. It's our belief as educational leaders here at PPS that if we continue to stay focused on the strategies we've put in place, but remain engaged in continuous improvement, we can continue to raise achievement for every one of our students. So we have taken several steps to make our vision a reality for all students. You named some of those, Chair Hollins, because we've talked about them on many evenings. Calibrating around a new instructional framework, maintaining a focus on standards-aligned teaching and learning, adopting new higher quality curriculum materials that our educators have never had in their hands before, offering aligned, rich professional learning experiences for our teachers and our leaders. Now this school year, we've also added full-time school-based instructional coaches, adding to the learning acceleration specialists, high-dosage tutors, early literacy specialists, and various mental behavioral health professionals to support our students' non-academic needs that will also support their readiness to learn. You're right, school system transformation, it isn't accomplished overnight. But we have worked diligently for years to build up and establish all the necessary practices required to drive district improvement. We all recognize that we can and should do better when it comes to closing these persistent achievement gaps, and that's especially true with Black student achievement. And so while we're witnessing continued positive signs, incremental evidence that we're moving the needle, we're clear regarding the primary task of narrowing persistent opportunity gaps and the need to accelerate Black student outcomes. So for those in the audience, if you could just raise your hand if you're a school or district administrator here at PPS. Okay, that's most of the audience, directors, you'll note, that are here this evening. They're here to observe and listen to the conversation and contribute to the discussion as appropriate. See, many of these folks are on the front line each and every single day, supporting and supervising the work of our schools, our leaders, and our educators. They're the ones that have the first-hand knowledge of the work and the improvement efforts that are occurring in our school communities. I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Adams, our Chief of Research Assessment and Accountability. He's going to be presenting our district's disaggregated data at a high level from this spring's past state assessment. He's joined at the table by several more of our senior leadership, all known characters to you. And I know that colleagues here in the audience, they'll be anxious to join in the conversation too, given the direct nature of their work that contributes to the results that we're observing here tonight. With that, Dr. Adams.
Thank you, Superintendent. Tonight we will be entering the presentation at the middle based on a request by the board chair, and I just wanted to provide some context about the presentation for people who may be watching at home and wondering why we're not starting at slide 1. The presentation as uploaded to our website was intended to go from a broad view of comparing us to the state, to comparing our results year over year, to comparing how well or not we're doing based on the pandemic learning losses and where we are today, and then to have a conversation to invite Principal Barry and Assistant Principal Martinez from Sitton Elementary up to have some discussion about the leadership moves that they've made at their building that are seeing some individual success. So we were intending to sort of funnel from state level to site-specific information. And so at the request of the chair, we'll be beginning the conversation with sharing information about our board goals. Then, if it would be okay, we would love to have Principal Barry and Assistant Principal Martinez share their information about what they're doing at Sitton Elementary, and then we could have the discussion around the board goals that I believe the board is wanting us to have. But I just want to make sure that order feels okay.
So you want to do the presentation with the Sitton?
I would like to just go through the couple of slides on the board goals, then it leads into the conversation for Sitton Elementary, and then come back and have the discussion on the board goals, if that would be okay.
Sure.
Okay. All right. So as the board well knows, we have 4 board goals for our students. Those are 3rd grade reading, 5th grade mathematics, 8th grade readiness, which is proficiency in both English language arts and mathematics, and graduation rate. Based on our most recent OSAS data, tonight we'll be focusing on the board goals around 3rd grade reading, 5th grade mathematics, and 8th grade readiness. We will examine both our year-over-year growth and the extent to which targets for our student groups were met. In 3rd grade reading, you'll note on the slide that we see that our Latinx students and our white students saw increased performance, while all other student groups saw declines in student achievement. I want to caution us whenever we look at as I typically do, whenever we're looking at the performance of our Native American and our Pacific Islander students, that those are extremely small counts of students, and so there can be wild swings of proficiency based on just the change of 1 or 2 students. When we look at a chart showing which board goals were met and which were not, for 3rd grade reading, the data are not great. We see that we did not meet the board goals for our targeted student groups in 3rd grade reading. And I'll leave this slide up for a moment. For 5th grade mathematics, we see that all student groups, with the exception of our Pacific Islander students, showed year-over-year growth in 2023 compared to 2022. Here, the increases range from 1.3 percentage points to a little over 4 percentage points. And so one of the things we've been noticing is that we're seeing a more acceleration in student growth in mathematics, because we're in that, we believe that is because we're in that 2nd year of the mathematics adoption, whereas we were in the 1st year of the English language arts adoption. So we think that's one of the reasons. And when you're in that 1st year, you often see an implementation dip where your scores actually go down as educators are learning the curriculum and getting their feet under them and really working to bring the curriculum and the instructional resources to life. In examining the status of 5th grade, the 5th grade math board goal, we can see that while most student groups did make progress, they did not make the required progress to meet the board goals. Notable exceptions include our Asian students and our Native students. 8th grade readiness measures the percentage of students who are both proficient, as I mentioned, in English language arts and in mathematics. We know that entering high school with a strong foundation in the basics puts students on a successful trajectory. For this metric, Black and Pacific Islander students saw no change in performance year over year. Latinx, multiracial, and white students saw improved student performance, and there was a huge positive swing in the performance of our Native students. Again, we want to interpret that swing with caution due to the relative small size of that group. And when we examine the status of 8th grade readiness metric against the targets for each student group, we see that Native American students met their goal while all other targeted student groups did not. And so we know we have much work to do. As I said, when I was at Sitten last week, I won't be personally satisfied until our bars are at 100%, although we are pleased to see some positive progress in the face of local and national results that don't point to positive progress at all. Some conclusions very quickly before we invite Principal Berry and Assistant Principal Martinez up to the dais. We're bucking the national trends in student achievement. I don't think that should be taken lightly. Across the nation, we're seeing declines in ELA and steeper declines in mathematics. Here we're seeing some growth, particularly in mathematics. In terms of reaching, lots of school districts and states talk about whether or not they have reached pre-pandemic levels of achievement, knowing that pre-pandemic levels of achievement weren't ideal, but that is a marker knowing we had interrupted learning and learning loss. We're seeing here in PPS that we are approaching, and in some cases at some grade levels, exceeding pre-pandemic levels. And for student groups that are still below pre-pandemic levels, most groups are demonstrating growth. We've said before that our achievement levels exceed the state in all grades in both subjects, and we've continued that progress, as was noted that this was occurring in some previous years. And then finally, when we disaggregate the data, we still see that we have performance gaps along the lines of race. Those are not acceptable, as I've said before in the past, and for most student groups, the board goals were not met. There was a request to understand and highlight schools that were meeting with some success. And on the screen before you are some elementary and middle schools that are seeing overall growth in both English language arts and mathematics. Those schools include Sitten, Whitman, Rigler, Lent, Arleta, Creston, Lee, Irvington, and Markham at the elementary level, and include at the middle school level Kellogg, Tubman, Beaumont, and Jackson. I'll leave that here for just a second so you can see what those overall increases were. And next, there was also a request to hear directly more frequently from principals, and we were asked specifically about schools where the achievement needle was moving for African American students. So I'm very pleased that we have with us tonight to highlight Sitten Elementary, Principal Berry and Assistant Principal Martinez. Not only was there some double-digit growth overall, but we had almost double-digit growth in ELA for African American students and double-digit growth in mathematics. Both of these figures are among the highest that we see for African American achievement here in PPS. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Principal Berry and Assistant Principal Martinez down to the table. Thank you both for being here so much.
All right, and thank you so much for the invitation. Good evening. I'm Becky Berry, principal at Sitten Elementary School.
And I'm David Martinez, the assistant principal at Sitten Elementary School.
Well, thank you. And if we're going to mix it up a little bit, and if we could go to the next slide.
Okay.
We're going to start there. And give you a moment to just kind of take a look. We really appreciate getting to be invited to your living room this evening. But we want to tell you a little bit about where we spend most of our days. So we are Sitten Elementary School. We are the farthest north school in Portland. We are up there near Terminal 3 and the end of Fessenden when it turns into Lombard. And we serve 350 delightfully funny, curious, brilliant, diverse, and always students in grades K through 5. So we have 3 classes at every grade level, one of which is taught predominantly in Spanish as part of our dual language immersion program. The other 2 are taught predominantly in English. We love our DLI program, and we see it as a huge lever for a lot of our growth, especially for our English language learners and our Latino students. And we are also Portland's first neighborhood school, which means 2 years ago, we began welcoming every single child who lives in our neighborhood into our school, regardless of their disability, eligibility category, or level of need. And that has also been a huge lever in us growing our student gains, because when we focus on supporting students from a universal lens, our students who have the greatest amount of needs. Every single child and adult in our entire community benefits from that. And so we are so proud of the work that our educators do with kids every day, because if we want to talk about the geography of change is what happens between the interactions of adults and kids and kids and kids in the building every day. And so we're really here to represent their work. And our shift in data is really about a shift in small choices that each of us kind of made collectively, because our data as a CSI school in the 18-19 school year, where 12% of our students and only 8% of our African American students were reading at grade level, was not at all a reflection of what they are capable of. Rather, that was a reflection of the skill and collective will in our building at the time. And so that's how anybody who comes into our building who is interviewing for a position, that's how we introduce our school. And then we ask them to take a look at our true north behind us, and we ask the question, does this reflect your values also? And the reason that we start that way is because it has a system of belief, a system of habit in it, and also it points to our outcomes. And we have done so much work in our building around the instructional framework and our curricular tools, and those are really foundational pieces to the change that we have undergone at Sitten, but it's also only one component of it. And so if we could go back to the first slide. Mr. Martinez is going to talk about this model for collective efficacy that we've been working on to lift those things, to move everybody along in our building. So I'll turn it over to you.
So this was a belief belt that was introduced to me a couple years ago, actually from a professional development through the state. And it stuck with me, one, because I personally identified with it, but also really spoke to what I was seeing from the district level at our school building. And so we started out last year with me introducing it, and almost at every other staff meeting we reintroduce it and we talk about it. And it really started with a belief. And it started with a belief both with Becky and I, but with our staff and with our community. And really defining that our beliefs and what we believe our students are capable of directly impact the opportunities and the systems that we build for them. And so we do not have the belief that they will succeed, the belief that they can succeed, and the belief that they should succeed. We'll never give them those opportunities to demonstrate that. We'll never build those systems that will offer those opportunities to them. And if you don't build those systems and those opportunities, you will never have the chance to see what they can achieve. And so that was really fundamental for us as a staff and as an administration to really hone ourselves that we believe our students are possible. We believe that they need these opportunities, and we believe that with these skills and opportunities, they're gonna go far. And so with those beliefs, we offered them opportunities, and these were small opportunities. It was a shift from simply saying they can't to they're just going to. I'm gonna try. I'm just gonna try and see. Because if you never give them the opportunity to try, they will never have the opportunity to show them what you can do, what they can do. And so we did those shifts from small to large changes throughout the school year. But what we saw is opportunities for our students really shifted. And the achievement slowly but surely through PLCs, through everyday interactions, it was simple conversations of, I tried it, and I was astounded by what I saw. And consequently, I'm gonna offer that more. I'm gonna rig it up. I'm gonna not lower my bar, but I'm gonna raise the bar for students. And subsequently, that was our theme for last year, raising the bar. And so the achievements that we saw, while they were surprising, they were affirming, they weren't too shocking because we finally saw the opportunities our students were given by our educators because the beliefs in them shifted, the beliefs in their families shifted, the beliefs in our community really shifted the last 3 years. This was not an overnight success or an overnight transformation. We're definitely still not done. We haven't arrived at all, but we're definitely seeing some of the beginning fruits of that labor of just shifting common day beliefs, offering new opportunities, and then subsequently building those systems. That's where we're really seeing some achievement.
So if we could go to the slide that is titled Mindsets and Beliefs. And so we've been collecting these things from our educators that come in every day saying, oh, I read this really interesting thing, or I saw this speaker. And just from, keeping up with the national conversation about what's working. And so this list changes every year. Some things we no longer need. And then there are things that come up through our, leadership team and our site council that we really need to add. And so one of those things is that all students are general education students first, and that special education is a spectrum of services, not a person or a place. And when you have that belief, you're able to shift towards a system of inclusion where all students belong at your school, and it feels different. But you can't have and positive, but you can't just have mindsets and beliefs. You also have to build systems that support those beliefs. And so if we could go to the next slide. Next one. These are just a few of the systems that stem from beliefs that we have built. And again, these systems come from having a instructional framework where we're all speaking the same language when we come to leadership, when we're walking through classrooms. They rely on us all having the same curriculum and understanding how to use the curricular tools. They all come from the professional development that we've been receiving. They're not separate at all from those things, but it's really just these are examples of the leadership moves and systems that take it from vision to lived reality in the building. And so I think one of those pieces, to just get specific, is around consult and our pre-referral process. Before the pandemic, we had one of the highest rates of office discipline referrals for an elementary school in the entire district, and that was because we had a system of going to respond in the moment. It was a reactive system, and so a teacher would have a hard time. They would look at the discipline matrix, they would call for assistance, someone would come to the building and try to repair or reset a kid. And the impact of that system, that reactive system, is that kids, especially kids of color, were spending so much time missing out on core instruction, and our educators were getting the unintended message that they didn't have the tools that they needed to support all learners in their classrooms. And so we shifted to a consult system, and we said, if you can predict a problem, you can prevent it. And no one has to know all the answers, and no one, needs to know everything, and we all have to be curious learners. And so if we can predict that someone's gonna have a hard time, then you have the responsibility to find a time to meet with one of our consult members, and that is our extremely robust staff of 2 instructional specialists, a school climate coach, a comprehensive school psychologist, a school counselor, all of those supports, and meet to problem solve. Not because anybody has the answer necessarily, but rather that through that conversation, we're gonna learn how to better support students. And so that has shifted. I think that this year, so far, we have 2 office discipline referrals, and a lot of kids in class enjoying their learning. And so it's been a big shift. So we go to the last slide. Next one.
And this is our data comparatively. So over the years, 18-19, that's our pre-pandemic, and disaggregated all students with disabilities. This is the SWT, our Black students, our multiple race students, Latino, Native American, and white. So our achievement, as I said earlier, while we were thrilled, a little shocked, it wasn't surprising given the shifts in beliefs and the opportunities that our staff offered our students and the systems that were built, both administratively with our staff themselves building the systems because they believed in their students. These achievements came to fruition. And we're not there where we can say we did it, but we're definitely on our way. We look forward to continued success and to really see where our students can thrive.
Thank you, Principal Berry and Assistant Principal Martinez. Do board members have any questions of the administrative team?
Is this okay, so I don't know how we're gonna answer them. Did you see or how did you deal with pushback from your staff when you were trying to make your shift to go from one way to another way?
Our staff is, and I believe this is we are consumers of beliefs, right? Like we get to choose what we believe. And the least dangerous assumption for me as a building leader always is that our educators are the most invested in the success of their students. And because I believe that, I know that to be true, I am always gonna listen. And what I'm gonna hear is I'm gonna hear the next great idea. And so it's not about pushback because we're all on the same team. And that belief belt is really a system of, if the system is working for kids, it's going to show up in multiple data points. It's going to show up in our successful schools survey, in our MAP data, in just like that street level data of how it feels in the building. And then we're going to use that data to reaffirm those beliefs around all kids can do this, all of our educators can do this. And I mean, I also want to add that I think that there is often a misunderstanding of change leadership, that it's about getting other people to do stuff. And I learned early on as an educator that you can't get anybody to do anything. Like I learned that in my first year of teaching, but rather we can change what we're doing. And when we change what we're doing, when we change what habits we have, it has a huge ripple effect on the interaction that's happening. And so we spend a lot of time in reflection when things don't go well, thinking about like, what could we have done differently or better? And I think my leadership takeaway for us who have, we leaders, we deserve none of the credit and we have all of the responsibility, because the credit really goes to our educators and our students and our families. And in order to set those conditions, we always need to think about, how am I going to show up differently? Like, what are the interactions that I'm not having that I should be having? What are the questions that I need to be asking that I'm not asking? And so I think it really is an internal reflective piece.
I like that answer. The other question that I have is around your consult and pre-referral. So if you can predict a problem, then you can do something to engage to try to figure out what we can do about that said problem. And then you referenced it based on a policy that states that you looking at a discipline module, this is what we're supposed to do. So what you added, is that something that was given like from district guidance, or is this something that you came up with on your own? And how does it work with or against what the current policies are around how to do that consult and pre-referral, that aspect of it?
Professional consultation is part of our teacher standards and practices. It's part of our licensure programs. It's part of every grad program that there is to be a teacher or an administrator, and it is also embedded in our MTSS systems. And I think one of the big levers, and as leaders, we get to choose, where am I going to turn the volume up? And oftentimes, I think that we feel the most comfortable organizationally turning the volume up on the document, the flow chart. It feels safe, like I know what's going to happen next. But when we turn the volume up on David, I don't know, what are we going to do? Like, that feels a little scary. And so to answer your question, but that's about like, what change am I going to make? What are the questions that I should be asking that I'm not asking? And so simple answer to your question is, it is embedded in so many systems that we have. And I think it's a real opportunity for us to lean into more of those adaptive leadership elements as we not take on new things, but further refine what we have in place.
I think also the utilization of our comprehensive psychologist on site full time, who runs those meetings and the agendas and supports and follow-ups, is essential to the success of that program.
Yeah, you mentioned the consultant pre-referral program had a psychologist, a counselor, and one other thing.
We have a half-time social worker. We have 2 interventionists, and none of these systems could run without the people power. Mm-hmm. And not just the people power, but us all being together as a team year after year, building trust and saying, ooh, what didn't work? What are we going to do differently? Because I've been at Sitten, this is my 8th year in our building, and this is David's 3rd year. And we have Dana Nuremberg in the back, forever Falcon and principal of Sitton Elementary School. And so I think to go back to the comments at the very beginning from the superintendent, time is an essential ingredient to change. Because this would have been a very different presentation if we had been sitting up here 2 years ago.
When did you get all the help for the consultant pre-referral? When did you get the extra people, the psychologist, the counselor, and the social worker?
Yeah, that has been new since the SIA funds, and then also we've had an instructional coach that we have funded through our title funds, and now to have that just kind of built into our staffing ratio has been fabulous, so that we've been able to continue to fund our 2 interventionists that yesterday and today they ran 90-minute data meetings with every single educator, and then in the afternoon during our staff meeting time during our Teaching and Learning Tuesday, they also facilitated our new Power Math meeting. And so they're running these systems for people where educators are getting to come together and problem solve and solution find and be learners. And that is where the change is happening for us.
Well, I was there, and it was wonderful the other day, and saw your counselor and your wonderful dog, and you could just feel it there, how well it was.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the, you said you had the PLC working weekly, and also the teacher collaboration time. And yeah, I'm just curious about what kind of like format structures and also maybe what supports you have. I guess I just want to hear more about it.
PLC, so professional learning communities, Becky and I and our instructional specialists facilitate those every Friday. So that's really important. That keeps Becky and I's hands in the curriculum and what's going on in the classrooms. We're part of those meetings. We know the data, we have our hands on it, and we get to hear directly from our teachers what's working and what's not. And central to those meetings is really looking at the gaps of our students. We were really intentional of looking at the data and just aggregating it. Looking at focal students, so identifying a group of 5 or 6 students in your classroom that you're going to identify, primarily students of color, and tracking that data, looking at it, collaborating with your educators at the grade level and also supports to see how do we fill these gaps in the now. So that's really essential, I think, for Becky and I last year and this year to be not just sitting in there, but leading those meetings. It's not just a benefit for academics, but also joy to see the growth and the belief of our teachers and educators shift. And again, we really do see that belt happening in those 40 minutes throughout the day. So it's essential, I think, to our leadership.
And if I could chime in, Director Wong, we share your curiosity, which is why Dr. Franco and I are having Dr. Gilkey, who was here earlier, and her team, they're having one-on-one interviews with all the principals that have seen the growth that they've seen, that we've highlighted, so we can understand what leadership moves are happening across our buildings, so we can understand what we can help support, bring to scale. All right, thank you, Principal Berry, Assistant Principal Martinez.
So much.
Really appreciate you being here.
Great job, you guys.
All right. My understanding is the board desired to have some discussion around the board goals, and I'm joined here by, got a whole team of doctors. Dr. Franco, Dr. Proctor, Dr. Armstrong, and I are here. Yes. To respond to questions you may have.
So I'm going to refer to my colleagues first because I have a whole bunch. So I'm going to refer to them first if anyone has any questions for them. All right, hearing none.
Director DePass has her hand raised.
Thank you. I had my hand raised and I've lowered it, but I wanted to just thank Principal Berry and Assistant Principal Martinez for their presentation, and also I got to witness with my own eyes their school community last week, and it was fabulous. And the therapy dog was really cute. I just wanted to highlight a few things that stuck out for me about the presentation, and that was a couple of the mindsets. That's that student success is a direct result of what the adults do, and also that graph, and I think it was mindset number 9 that says success is not a straight line. It's very nonlinear. And so I was really interested in, and also this idea about, turning the mirror on yourself and, looking at where, you can't blame stuff on other people outcomes. We have to look at our own behavior. And I started thinking about how I could show up differently. I can't change anybody on the board. Sometimes I would like to, many times I would, but I can change myself, and that would be to advocate for, a board that has literally 2 committees. That would be student success and policy. And if we're really focused on student outcomes, then we need to be hyper-focused on what matters. And right now, to your point, Chair Hollins, about what we're at a transformative stage, we are also at a period where we could look seriously at mimicking what other school districts do, even a couple in Oregon that literally have 1 board meeting a month and 1 board meeting where they're focused on policy and student success as a board community. So I'm just saying that because I recognize that I can't change anybody, but I can absolutely change the way that I show up. And so it's just a kind of a question or comment out there about, can we actually, we have a retreat coming up, can we give some serious thought to how we show up as adults? What are the things that we can drop that aren't student focused? What are the committees we can drop? And we can start with the audit committee. So I'm happy, be happy to go to once or twice, just required, absolute bare minimum requirement for meetings, if that would translate to student outcomes that made a difference here.
Michelle, you should see our auditor. She's here.
I know she is. And I'm sure it's not a reflection on our senior auditor. It's more a reflection on what I have in the sphere of my control, which is only myself and my body. And, what can I do for change management? And it really is about looking inward and saying, do we need the numerous committees, or do we focus on policy, on student success? And that's it. It's just a question that's out there I have. So thank you. Thank you for being in the audience, senior auditor.
Thanks, Michelle. All right, so I'm going to start with some of the questions that I sent them earlier on, so hopefully you had time to look at them and stuff. So my first question is, at what numerical threshold does the data reach a level of statistical significance or insignificant that PPS shares with us?
Sure, that's a great question. Statistical significance is usually used in research where, let's say, our entire population is 300 and we've only worked with 30 or 40 of the students. Then you run statistical significant tests because you're trying to understand, is what you see of the 30 and 40 students representative of what you would see of all 300 students if you had a chance to work with all 300 of them. When we talk about our OSAS results, we're looking at 95% of the population of the school system and the attested grades. And so you don't necessarily do statistical significance testing because you have all of, or just almost all of the students represented in the data. So the differences are those differences and they matter.
Okay. So when we bring up statistical significance or not, and just help me, because I've been trying to go through this data all weekend long. So if you have a data that is, when we talk about proficiency, and you have, that those are that tested as, say, 10 students, and one of the students, only one student, or 3 students, or only 3 students, is proficient. And so that gives a 30% grade, right? When the population of that school is much larger. Would that be considered significant, insignificant data? Or, because I guess for me, it looks like it's representation of the whole school when you're only talking about 3 students, or whole student class and grade and student group. for the whole school.
Right, that would not be an appropriate use of the idea of statistical significance. I understand what you're getting at. We have schools with relatively smaller numbers of students of color. We believe that each of those students matters and counts, and that we want to celebrate when we're seeing the needle move. If you've been in a school where your performance of students was 0 and you've brought that performance up to say 45%, that's a big deal whether it's 100 students or 20 students, because you're getting closer to 100%. The goal is to get to 100%.
Okay. So when I was looking at the data, so I looked at the data, and first thing you guys brought up was the comparison to the state, and when you've already mentioned that the state, that we have already outperformed the state. So if we have historically outperformed the state, what significance was it to broadcast it this time versus any other time that we outdo the state?
Well, I think the differences that we saw that you may have noted in Dr. Williams' memo around the data is that the state saw very little movement in their numbers. In addition to that, the state is not seeing a return to improvement to pre-pandemic levels, and we are. And so I think when I looked at and understood the national story of student performance based on the nation's report card, that is the NAEP assessment, when I think about our preliminary look at the state data before they released it, comparatively, we could have seen a dip and not been outperforming the state as much as we had been, but we didn't. So that's what we were trying to celebrate.
Okay, so you said we didn't see a dip. You mean, you're talking about overall?
Overall.
When we talk about our board goals, there were dips, right? And so help me, I'm trying to figure out what is your thoughts of why we've seen those dips in those certain student groups versus other student groups?
I think that's a great question. What I know of my own work in turnaround schools as an administrator is that the first thing you see is achievement for all students rise. And then once you see that needle moving in the right direction, you're then usually able to really target focus on particular focal students, whether those be students with disabilities, multilingual learners, or students of color. While I can't sit here and say I know exactly why student groups saw dips in performance, I can say that we're concerned when we see dips of performance because we believe that we are empowering our educators and our building leaders with the tools that should alleviate that performance. And as you heard Principal Berry talk about, in many ways it comes down to belief in students and belief in self as a teacher. When I was a middle school special ed teacher, my students went as far as I believed they could go and as far as I believed I could take them. And that's what we're trying to empower our educators to understand, that the grade level standard, that level of rigor is what is fundamental to helping students achieve. And anything less than that is not going to cut it. It's not going to make the muster, and the students won't make it if we don't do that.
All right, next question. So when I looked at the data for the student groups, and a lot of student groups, when I compared it to the states, the state was higher than ours. So when you look at African Americans and English language arts for the 3rd grade, the state average was 22%. Our average was 15.5%. So I'm trying to understand how, when you compared the overall to the state, did you use that same rationale when we're looking at our board goals as well?
So we did not compare our board goals to state data. As we noted in the answers we provided to the questions that we had far enough in advance, the state does not calculate 8th grade readiness, right? They don't give us that idea of which individual students are both proficient in English language arts and mathematics. So we didn't necessarily do those comparisons. We thought the most appropriate comparison when we start looking internally again, right? Our conversation was compared to the state overall, compared to ourselves overall year over year, by race, by special education, compared to pre-pandemic learning. We know we have a lot of room to grow, and we have a lot of work to do.
Okay, well, I've been hearing that for 3 years. We got a lot of work to do. We have I get that part. I guess my question is that I'm looking at the data, and if the data is not showing a change, at least for the 3 years I've been here, I don't know how long it's been. I mean, even in 2019, we had a dip, and this was before pre-pandemic. If we're still seeing these same levels that is constant for these student groups, why are we not doing something different? Because when I looked at data almost all the way back to like almost 2015. It's almost the same data for some of our student groups. Why are we not doing anything different?
So I would offer that since we've had Dr. Proctor on the team, we have been doing something different.
We have been doing a number of things differently. I can speak to since August 2021. But actually, before I arrived, the district took the community and stakeholders through a process to identify elements that were key in the strategic plan. Since coming on board, what I have shared with the board previously is some initial findings that we found in our academic diagnostic, and then with that, we forged forward with the adoption of high-quality instructional materials. As the board would recall, we shared with the board a couple of years back, because this is my third year as well, that we were in corrective action with the state because here at PPS we had not adopted curriculum along the timeline and cycle recommended by the state, and we had to come to corrective action. So we have since embarked on adoption of our early learning curriculum. In my first year was the first year of implementation of our foundational skills, and then in that same year, we went through the process of adopting K-5 ELA curriculum, actually K-12 ELA curriculum, and 6-12 math curriculum. We were in the first year of implementation in the 2021-2022 school year of our K-5 math curriculum. So what we have done differently is, number one, adopted curriculum. Second thing that we had done differently is the district did not have a process, a streamlined process of focusing on teacher professional learning. And what we have developed is a department, a group that is focused on teacher professional learning. And with that, in going through the process, using the data that we collected from our academic diagnostics and our instructional reviews that was previously shared with the board by myself a couple of years ago, we then developed an instructional framework. A instructional framework is a set of look-fors that identifies clearly what does good instruction and what should good instruction look like here at PPS, because we were seeing inequities in instructional opportunities that were being provided to students. We saw that students did not have even access to grade level aligned curriculum, high quality text, or practices. And so with that Department of Teacher Professional Learning, we honed in specifically on how it is that we can now bring these things together in an effort to provide professional learning to our teachers and also to our building leaders about our shifts in our priorities. Those are three things that we did differently. Going into my second year, and this is for me to recall, so going into the second year, another shift that we went into, which was looking differently at how we did learning acceleration. And within that budget year, we identified that we were going to hire learning acceleration specialists that were going to work. We were going to look at the data, identify where our pockets of students, our Black and Native and Latino students were lower performing in what pockets of schools, and identify our learning accelerations to be deployed within those schools to provide learning supports and interventions to our students so that they had not only access to grade level standards aligned instruction, but they also had access to a learning acceleration interventionist specialist to work specifically with them. That's 4. The 5th thing that we did differently is that even in this past budget year, we revisited our structure again to look at how it is that we can ensure that it is more student-centered and that we were getting more of the learning supports to our students. So in the past budget year, just that this past spring, we have now in this year implemented ensuring that every school has an instructional coach. And with the work of the instructional coach, we can ensure that we are taking our priorities and our strategies and working closely with those instructional coaches so that they are in the schools, working directly with students and teachers and building leaders to formulate what we call a ILT, which is the instructional leadership team, right? And so as a team, similar to what you hear that is happening at Sinton, we wanted to take that type of practice where the ILT is coming together with the building leader, the instructional coach, and all of the supports provided, and having conversations about instruction. To ensure that that's happening, we've deployed a vehicle that is what we are calling like the staff development calendar. There is a calendar of meetings that we are supporting schools in having. And those meetings include teaching and learning focus meetings. It includes climate and culture focus meetings. It includes other meetings that are led by the principal leader. So these are a series of steps of things that we have done differently. Does the data point specifically to say we are seeing the results in these student groups? No. It's not happening yet. But I believe firmly in our practices, and that if we hold steady and know and acknowledge that this is, if we are in our 3rd year, it has been 2 years of implementation for some of those initiatives, and for others, it is only 1 year of implementation. And while we have had the board goals for a little over a year now, I want to say that what I understand about moving schools, about moving data in my experience, we have to first build capacity and shift practice. And while we see some early indicators that we may be moving in the right direction, it still will take a little time. And we hope that we will get there because we have shifted our practices and have done a series of things a little differently.
I'm glad to hear you say that. Go ahead.
Yeah, and just some follow-up questions. And so, like, I mean, implementing a lot of these programs, which is great. They all sound amazing. But then, it goes up the question, like, what is the plan to figure out whether they're effective or not? Like, how do we know what we know? Again, my basic question, right? We're like, where's the follow-up, and when do we get to know when these programs are actually effective or not?
I'm so glad that you asked that question, because we do have a plan for implementation and progress monitoring. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Kimberly Armstrong, who is our Chief Academic Officer, and who's going to lay out exactly what the plan has been, what we're currently doing, and how we're going to continue to move it forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Dr. Proctor. Good evening, board. Just to answer that quickly, so we have a team, and many of the individuals that are sitting behind us are part of a larger team that comes together to talk about how we lift this work into our schools. I so appreciate Chair Holland's words about being powerful beyond measure. We believe that, and we also know that really to uplift that, we're in the people business. I appreciate Principal Berry talking about not changing people, but I do believe that we can change the choices that they make every day to move learning in our buildings and across our sites. So for our 3 instructional priorities, we are designing this implementation plan. Well, it's actually designed, but we're continuing to come together and talk about it. We have instructional walks where we'll be out visiting 3 times this year, collecting data on what we're seeing and what's being experienced, so that we can then go back and change some of the choices or even maybe extend some of the opportunities that we've had for educators. And along with that, as Dr. Proctor mentioned, our site-based instructional coaches, they've been involved in learning weekly with us, and then pretty soon that's going to change to every other week model. And the team has done a really good job of really leaning into that model and making sure our coaches are all trained up so that when they're out in the sites, they are able to support learning. I really like to think of it as coordinated care. We have a chance to benefit from many systems that coordinate care for individuals. And I often, when I talk about it, I speak as if it like a clinic or a hospital, right? Where there's some diagnosing, and then there's a whole bunch of people that come together to coordinate care to make sure that whether it's wellness, intervention, prevention, or just extension. And that's one of the ways in which we've been talking about the work. And I think Dr. Franco can share more specifics on how senior directors of schools and principals are leaning in to really ensure that the work is moving.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you, Dr. Armstrong. And I just want to call out, we do have senior directors of schools behind us. We also have the senior directors within OTL and OSSS, and so definitely want to call attention their work. So again, back to your question, Director Wong, around how do we know? There are a multitude of avenues and checkpoints. I think if you listened, and I know you did, but there are a few things that I heard very specifically that came out of Principal Berry's presentation. She talked about things along the lines of curriculum. She talked about the instructional framework, which Dr. Proctor mentioned. She talked about PLC. She talked about leadership teams and ILTs. She also talked about this notion of collective efficacy, right? And then she also mentioned time. So those are all things that are consistent pieces, right? That as we think about leadership development and teacher professional learning, those are huge pieces consistently that we've applied across the board. I also want to talk a little bit about the school continuous improvement plan. I'm coming from Beaverton. It's the most robust thing I've seen in my 24 years of experience. When you're talking about metrics and measures, when you're talking about theories of actions and goals and progress monitoring, it is very distinct. And our senior directors of schools, they're not just plans on a wall. What we do with them is that schools submit, and then our senior directors provide very distinct feedback on, do those school improvement plans reflect our instructional priorities and our board goals? And we also engage in quarterly reviews where senior directors sit down with the ILT, the instructional coach, and the principal to note progress. And again, that happens every quarter. Dr. Adams mentioned we also do 3 times a year. We do school improvement plan showcases and mid-year reviews where they're publicly talking about not only their goals, but their strategies, and then what does the data look like, and then what adaptations or adjustments do you have to make. And I'd also say too, I don't want to underscore, our senior directors of schools meet with our principals on a weekly basis. It's a very tiered approach, and we've instituted a very consistent template this year where our conversations are immensely focused around our school improvement priorities and walking classrooms. I'd also say too that we have a standard in regards to the number of classroom visits that we expect teachers to have every single year, and that's 3 to 5 with feedback in terms of giving feedback via an informal observation. And that is distinct, using a common tool. So when you're talking about how do we know, there's a multitude of things overarchingly that we are employing across the board.
Look like Director Scott. Look like Director Scott had his hand raised.
Thanks. Yeah, I just want to actually pick up. I appreciate your question, Director Wong, and those answers I really appreciate. And I'm wondering, maybe just for me, take it to a little bit of a higher level around implementation, timeline, and research. And everything you just said makes a lot of sense. And There's a tremendous amount going on. I'm sort of curious, like all these interventions, all the things we're doing, have academic basis, right? They all have, they're all evidence-based. There's something that tells us it's supposed to work. What does the research tell us in terms of the timeline? And I think the reason I'm asking is, when I think about, Dr. Proctor, you mentioned the board goals are a year old. They were revised a year ago, so we disaggregated them more. But we did adopt these board goals over 4 years ago that were focused very much on these same things. And, I've been the one willing to say, like, look, the pandemic was a massive disruption, and we cannot discount like what happened just to keep the schools, functioning during that time. Now we're a couple of years beyond that, and I think it's getting back to the questions you're going to keep hearing from board members is, when do we know that it's time to pivot, and when do we know it's time to sort of stay the course? And I'm wondering, like, I've asked this question to the Council of Great City Schools and not really gotten sufficient answers, or clear answers. Are there large urban districts that have made the type of progress that we're trying to make? When I look at our fifth grade, I could when I'm looking at our board goals, I can look at our fifth grade goals, math, and say, okay, we didn't achieve our board goals, but almost all of our groups are moving in the right direction. So that says something. But when I look at our third grade reading, not only do we not meet the board goals, but with the exception of our Latinx students, they're all going in the wrong direction. And so what do you, from your perspective, leading these teams, doing these interventions, putting all these things in place, when do you know that it's like, we got to keep powering ahead, it's going to take another 1, 2, 3 years to see the type of progress we're making? Or, you know what, I think it might be time for a pivot, it might be time for a change, and it might be time to try something different?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I'll lean on everyone to kind of jump in, but I'll start with my response in this way, Director Scott, is that yes, absolutely, the pandemic was a huge interruption. And what we know from national trends and even in state trends, that students experienced a huge learning loss as a result of the pandemic, as a result of being out of school, as a result of being on virtual or online learning for a period of time. And during that time, I believe the district did some work in setting some new priorities through a strategic plan. And so by the time I arrived, we were able to come back to face-to-face school. Was that same first year of what I would call that reset, right? And so while we were able to employ our social emotional learning, ensuring that we were meeting the mental health of our students by increasing our investments in those areas, we also took on the task of getting back to academics and instruction. However, there was a learning curve when you considered student loss and the learning curve of adults in a new practice. I would say firmly that based on the practices that we put in place, that is proven and grounded in what we know according to the research as far as what students need in terms of high quality instructional materials, and a deeply engaging instruction, and really having access to high quality text, which was not standard across the district prior, that we are still in a position where we can see the growth that we are looking for. So while I understand maybe say board goals were developed 4 years ago in these areas, we did have that almost 2 year, year and a half interruption, and then had to do a reset and come back. And with coming back, we continued to plow forward in increasing our practices and making some really bold moves in the districts to do some things differently than how they were done pre-pandemic. Are we seeing across the country or across the state other districts, other large districts, even districts larger than ourselves, facing the same challenges? Absolutely, because after we came back from the pandemic, we had staffing shortages. We had some of the same issues that were happening across the country. However, we're still able to see in our initial results some arrows that are pointing to say that if we hold steady in this approach with these particular strategies, the indicators will show that we are moving in the right direction and we will get to those results that we're hoping for.
I really appreciate that, your response, and Director Scott, your question about, which I've asked too. I think even I asked it the first time in 2019 was, when would we expect that curve to look like a parabola? It maybe it's plateaued or flat for a while, but then it like immediately goes up. And I know it's hard to give an answer, but I would be really interested in knowing, I guess, a little to further your question, at what point do we abort an issue and try something else? Like, is there a point at which at which out in the future we decide that this is not working, and is that being evaluated regularly?
I would say that because these practices are new and in place just over a year, and what we know about research when it comes to leadership and implementing change, that it takes 3 to 5 years to see, and it's not an acceptable answer. I'm just saying what we know to be true. We won't see the change in 1 year, and if we abort now and try to do something else, we will delay the results that we want to see. One thing that is true, when you are implementing a new practice, you could almost expect an implementation dip. What I mean by that is, if it's me trying on something that I had not done before, as we're asking some of our professionals to do, they're not going to get it right, perfect, to fidelity the first time around. For every measure of accountability, we want to make sure that we're providing the support, the training, the development, and the support with the instructional coaching to support them in getting to a perfected and a most improved and desired instructional practice or practice, and then we will start to see the bend in the data.
And I just want to add, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, no, I'm sorry. I just want to add that we talk about pre-pandemic data, getting back to where we were before the pandemic, yet the students that we're referencing are post-pandemic with all of the impacts that came with it. And so when we think of our third graders who were testing last year, I mean, they had at that point, been in 2 years that were more typical than they were in the first 2 years with the disruption in late kindergarten, and then first year with the hybrid and all of that. And so I also want to hold on to that, like everything we know about research definitely suggests that there's implementation dips and that we need to stay with something for a while. But I also don't want to dismiss the fact that we have kiddos with post-pandemic impacts.
So
I just want, sorry.
So I just want to, we keep talking about this educational dip. So right now, with our averages for our kids not meeting proficiency, we have 83% of our black kids not meeting proficiency. We have 82.6% of our Native kids not meeting proficiency. We have 68% of our Latino kids not meeting proficiency. How much more dip are we anticipating?
So in the data, what we are saying is that we will start to see a shift in the data, kind of like what Dr. Adams indicated, is that you will see a broader shift amongst a broader group, and then you would be able to go back in and ensure that we're shoring up our supports for all of our groups. But we have to see initially what the data tells us and then go back and adjust our practice accordingly.
And this is a huge moment of reflection, right? In my opinion, we're clearly onto something in math. Last year, where everybody else dipped, we stayed steady, had some small gains. Like, not a whole lot. This year we had bigger gains than last year. In ELA, some small gains, but we're understanding, this is the time for us to understand from our teachers What is it about the ELA curriculum that with which they might be struggling more than the mathematics curriculum? Because that's one of the questions I have as I looked at the data. And we are in year 2 of math, right? We're in year 1. These data reflect year 1 of ELA, and so is that where we saw the dip? I'm hoping that is where we saw the dip, and we don't see it moving forward.
Well, I'm glad you asked that. I'm just ask one more thing. So when you talked about the math and reading data, do we see a correlation between math and reading data or averages that tells us anything?
It's a great question. So research would hold that there's a modest correlation between reading and math achievement, but not a big one or a strong one. We know, and I think we've all experienced through our own education and our kids' education, if you're a parent, that kids have relative strengths and weaknesses, and just because you're, great with your reading material doesn't always mean you're great with your math material. So while we did not run correlations on these particular data, and while I'm a proponent of, to unpack the types of mathematic problems that kids are presented today, you have to have some strong reading skills. We don't see overall this high correlation at all times because individual students are different.
And then I just want to add, and I appreciate the words of Dr. Adams, and I just have to add that the work that we're doing with early literacy is really significant and outstanding. And I know that the scores aren't necessarily representative of that just yet, but there's a reason why the state has invested the funds that they have on early learning across Oregon. There's a reason why we're getting multi-million dollars to continue to improve in that area, right? It's not just a Portland issue or an Oregon issue, it's a nationwide issue. And the curriculum and the way that those efforts have been coordinated, I think is above what's happening on the West Coast in general, and I've been in a couple of states. And if there are any questions about literacy specifically, we do have our senior director of pre-K 5 who can speak to the work that we're doing. But and just some highlights. We have teachers who have participated in the letters training at high numbers, right? That's adding that reading endorsement so that they're teaching reading the way that reading should be taught according to brain research. So I celebrate math, and I don't want to leave ELA out because this year the numbers weren't as significant as they were. There really is some amazing things happening, and I have some leaders here that can speak to that if there's a question.
And again, ELA 1 year of implementation with our newly adopted core curriculum, math 2 full years of implementation with our K-5 math adopted curriculum, 1 year of implementation, full implementation with our 6-12. We're at the beginning of a second year of implementation for much of it. And I think for the significant investments that we have made in these approaches, that it is important for us to continue in these approaches because we have not yet turned to see the results that we're looking for.
Yeah, as a teacher, retired teacher, I really appreciate that. It always seemed like just when you were starting to get a hold of something, they change.
Absolutely.
And you need to stick with it. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I also have a question. How are we doing with getting enough support, like the psychologist, the counselor, the half-time interventionists into all schools? I mean, obviously, we need it.
We're going to make room for Jay Buno, who is our Chief of Student Support Services, and he'll be able to give very specific response to that.
I was gonna kneel.
I'll see y'all later.
It's all right. And I am not a doctor, just Jay. Good evening. We have made a pretty significant investment in the last few years through our student investment dollars, or student investment account, SIA monies, in counselors, comprehensive school psychologists, and social workers. In this last year, We also went out and earned a federal grant, which allowed us to significantly increase the amount of comprehensive school psychologists that we have in our system, and are on track to, in the next 2 years, have a comprehensive school psychologist each one of our title schools, and in order to support, in reference to what you heard Principal Barry talk about at each one of our schools. In addition to that, we are working on supporting and creating healing school communities through community schools, which will provide social worker and social worker FTE to help coordinate care for all of our students in need at each one of our title schools also, which then allows us to use our other resources to support non-title schools with mental health supports, coordination of care, and wellness.
So mainly in the title schools. We're trying
No,
to.
we have reached out and experienced success in gaining additional resources through grants and also through the state in support of our title schools, which enables us to spread our supports
to
more
give it-
across all schools.
And I want to underscore something Principal Barry said. It wasn't just having people, it was the right people with the right mindsets.
Director.
Yeah, is it okay? Yeah, I feel. So I guess you're gonna hate me now. I'm sorry, but you know I have so much respect for the work you do, and there's a lot of things I really love seeing, like the early the literacy changes and things like that. Like I do have a disagreement with about the dip though, because having been involved in multiple curriculum changes and also leading implementation, I disagree because I feel like when the supports are right, new curriculum that is actually better usually leads to a surge of performance. I know this because Dr. Franco, thank you for bringing up Beaverton, because I remember working with Beaverton to implement new curriculum, and then all the teachers in PPS were like, why don't we get the same supports Beaverton did? I'm sorry, I don't. But the whole point is, I don't mean to pit one district together. I'm very sorry. I take that.
I will have to point out that we scored better than Beaverton.
Okay,
Oh,
thank
you
you.
beat me to the punch.
But that's just because our kids are awesome. But anyways, sorry, Beaverton. What was I going to say? You totally.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. I'm just worried, like, going back to what Director Scott was pointing, when do we know when we change course? And one of the things that, I'm also trying to give feedback, because having been in the district for over a decade and teaching for a lot longer and seeing other districts, been in other districts too, one of the things that we do see is that, like, we need to do things differently because we're not seeing the results. But one of the things that we don't see differently is the methods. And what I mean by that is, like, when there's a problem, let's throw new sauces on. Right? The pasta is horrible, right? So let's try marinara. Okay, that marinara is horrible. Let's throw some Alfredo on it, and it's still awful. And what we forget is that we need to go, the change is not throwing a new sauce on it. I'm sorry, I don't mean to diminish any, because I know your work is, how much respect I have for your work. So I don't need to keep saying that over and over again. But I guess my point is that like, even just listening to the presentation of Sitton, it goes back to basics, right? Which is basically, just like how we treat our students. All students want to learn. If they're not learning, it's because something's in their way. Right? All the teachers want to perform. If they're not performing better, it's because something's in their way. And it's a different mentality. And the fact that, like, I love the presentation by Sitton because it was not a top-down method. It was a bottom-up, right? We hear from our teachers what was working, what was not. We have these weekly collaboration time. We have something built into the system for them to take it over and improve the way they need it. Because, the honest truth is, like, every school, I mean, yes, we're Portland, but the needs of Sitton are different than the needs of Lewis, right? And they need different things. And so a top-down approach, yes, there are some things that we do need a top-down approach, I'm not speaking, and you all know this, I'm kind of talking, hopefully try to steer my whole goal. But anyways, just, one of the common themes I keep hearing over and over again is sometimes, and this is before your time, so it's not criticizing you, is that sometimes it's just like, it feels like the district is leading us instead of they're supporting us, right? And I keep hearing over and over again from a lot of principals and teachers, like, you know, it feels like we're serving the district instead of the district is serving us. I quote that from a friend of mine. I'm very sorry if you're watching. And one of the things is like, you know, every need of every community is different. And so, you know, again, like I keep saying, like back to basics. If we're not, if we keep throwing new sauces on it and it's not working, you know, again, we got to figure out, like, as a teacher who has been in this district for many, many years, I've seen this all before. And every teacher will say the same thing. We've seen this all before and we'll just wait it out, right? So at what point do we say, hey, maybe this is not worth waiting out? Maybe this is some time we need to pivot and be like, teachers, what, you know, or students, they know just as much. What do you need, right? It's a, you know, I'm worried that there are some, you know, like I agree that a lot of the programs that you're implementing, 100% support, but then needs to be, I think, the other piece where it's just, we gotta meet them where they're at.
So what
right?
I would,
where's that conversation?
I appreciate that. I think one of the things that went unsaid in our approach to professional learning is we have made shifts. The first year with math, we didn't really provide a whole lot of PD. The second year, we provide centralized PD and heard overwhelming feedback from educators and principals that PD needed to be site-based. And so this year, that's what we're exactly doing. So we're trying to go back to basics. We're trying to make sure that the embedded instructional coach, who's part of the school community, is working with his, her, or their principal to create the professional learning with our support that will best meet the needs of their teachers and their students. That's just one example.
And I do want to, you know, go back to the presentation from Sitton. They have a school community, as you've described, that have taken on a practice to ensure that they reflect on what their belief systems are around what students are able to do. They ensure that they're able to put the systems in place and provide opportunities, and that's why they're able to see the results. But I do also want to point out that Sitton made it very clear that they are adopting the curriculum, they're implementing, they are working with the instructional framework, and they are using the resources and materials as prescribed, you know, through the work and through the shift that we have made. And so when we look at, you know, how it is that we are doing things differently to improve practices, I think it takes a balanced approach, sir, and with all due respect. And it does take us coming together with a body of knowledge and research of how we can make some shifts in our practice so that we can see the results that we want and then support schools at the ground level for effective implementation, for community building, and for teacher input and student input and voice into how they will have it make sense for their school community.
Oh, am I going to get a chance at some point?
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, I was trying to add a question in around the dip, but before I ask the question about the dip, I do want to just start by saying I really appreciated and was inspired by the Sitton story, so thank you for coming and sharing it. Those students in the far northern corner of the district are very lucky, it sounds like. And it seems like, you know, that's what we want for all of our students, that intentional care that they're getting. So thank you for, and I know there's lots of other principals and teachers and staff doing really hard work in every corner of the district as well. But I want to go back to the dip because, I've been around so long. It's hard for me to process that it's just like a dip, because when I look at the data and I'm looking at the it's like implementation dip. I'm looking at the memo that Dr. Adams, you sent us that has the third grade disaggregated data, and there's a, unless I'm reading it wrong, but you can tell me, on page 16, there's a 5.4% decrease for Asian students, a 1.5 for Black students, increase for Latinx, a 1.7 decrease for multiracial, a 11% decrease for Native American, and 4% decrease for Pacific Islanders, and a 1.3 increase for white students. And then I look at the by school data, and we have 28 of the elementary schools, the third grade ELA achievement having increases, and 34 having decreases. It seems to me that if we were having an implementation dip, it would be across the district and across racial lines. So I'm curious about that. Or is it that some schools have implemented and others haven't, in which that's a different issue. But to have, I say, and there's a lot in Zone 6 that have dips, and I don't think it's because they're not working hard, but we're not seeing across the board an implementation dip by school or by racial group.
Yeah, I want to clarify what I said, just so that it's not misunderstood, if that's okay. What I was trying to convey is that what research typically tells us is that when implementing a new practice, it is common to see an implementation dip. What we do know to be true here at PPS is that with our new implementations, that it has taken some time. We've only been implementing in 1 year for some areas, and in that 1 year implementation, it's not going to be, it has not been, and it's not typical that it would be 100% implementation at 100% fidelity. There is a learning curve for our educators that we are providing the support, the professional development, and the coaching so that they can get to full implementation. And so part of what I was trying to convey is because we have not seen in the 1 year in much of this that we have seen full implementation, that we need to stay steady in our practice so that for the investments that we have made, for what we believe is possible, and for the strategies that we have put in place in making significant shifts over the past 2 years, we need to continue forward so that we could get to that, to bridge that learning curve, if you will, so that we could have full implementation.
Yeah, so.
If I could just add.
Just gonna, go ahead.
To answer your question, because I'm feeling left out. Fidelity of implementation of new curriculum, that's one factor. Presuming that there's 100% degree implementation in the use of the material, you know, you see the list of schools here that you're referring to, Director Brim Edwards, and every one of their supervisors are sitting right there. We have, of course, have to have a more nuanced understanding of what's happening in each of these school communities. It's not just the material. It's what are the conditions? What are the practices? Has there been a stability of leadership at all levels of the organization, maintaining a consistency, to use the pasta analogy? We're not just throwing a bunch of spaghetti at the cabinet here. We've made very judicious choices about not just when and where we're implementing curriculums, but how we align the professional development and leadership training. We've added to the recipe by deploying instructional coaches in our schools. That's going to up the ability and the capacity at the school level to have conversations around how practices are shifting or not. What are we noticing with the specific diverse students that we serve? It's helping the principal, and many more of them now working single-handedly necessarily, to have that thought partner to design judicious, deliberate, purposeful agendas for their instructional leadership teams, for their department content meetings, for their grade level team meetings, and other intervention teachers and special education team educators, you know, to talk about the specific students that they're serving. So yeah, what we're seeing, about half of those schools are showing some tremendous growth. And so how do we understand what's happening in those schools? Those are the conversations that our senior directors are having. This is why it's so important that our principals get regular opportunities to visit one another's schools, so that when they engage in those instructional rounds, they're comparing notes about what those effective practices, about what that change management looks like and we say it all the time in every single principal PD meeting, so that we build the collective efficacy, right? That there's an understanding that they have agency to build our students' own sense of self-efficacy. So we've tried to be really deliberate about our choices, just as dangerous as letting something go too quickly because we think it's not working. We have to make sure that it was, implemented first, and then make some choices about how to refine and fine-tune it. And I don't think anybody would be against streamlining expectations or making sure that the instructional time that our students have is always high quality. So just a few additional thoughts about why we see these patterns. It isn't just a curricular response, it's all the rest. It's the data literacy, it's the use of the assessments, it's the way that teachers are engaging and asking themselves these questions.
So like I say, when I look at both the third grade ELA data, whether it's school-based or race-based, the concern I have, and this is just having sat at this table for 10 years, over two decades, that I'm concerned without a deeper analysis that it's not just implementation, but some of the other things. So like how often are principals rotating in our schools? 8 years. I don't think there's a lot of other schools like Sitten that would say they've had their principal for 8 years. And that allows a principal to develop relationships with staff, distribute leadership across staff. I mean, a lot of things happen when a principal has been for 8 years. So yes, I acknowledge there's probably a lot of other things, but the thing that concerns me is that PPS, I'm going to just sort of pivot back to Chair Holland's comments. What are we comparing it to? I don't, two of my three kids, left, or all three of my kids left the state to either work or go to school, and they're not competing just against Beaverton. They're competing against kids all across the United States for jobs and how to, getting into college, for careers. And they're competing all across the globe now because we have a global economy. So I want us to reset ourselves as higher standards, because I don't think anybody would point to Oregon's results as being what we think is what needs to happen. And one of the things PPS has consistently done is state, and this is, I'm going to just go back to my good friend Lorenzo Poe, who I served with, who said, when I talked about PPS being a great district and look at the outcomes, we're above the average, and him pointing out is like, yeah, that's the white kids. You know what Lorenzo would say is that's masking the performance of, because PPS has traditionally kept middle-class white families and middle-class white students, and we've had more money than at most other districts. Those outcomes have masked, when we talk about averages, have masks us not serving students of color very well, or special ed students. And so when we say we're above average or we're above the state, often it means our white students who are from middle class families, who their parents went to college and have a lot of privilege, are what's driving those outcomes. And when I'm concerned when I look at the disaggregated data, with the exception of the Latinx students, all of the other students of color are seeing a decrease, and we have an increase, which for white students, which just given the number of white students there are, that masks what's happening with our other students. So I think we really need to dig down. It's the curriculum and a whole host of other things, and if we just are comparing ourselves to other districts and not how are those other 34 schools, and I'm just focusing on third grade reading, although we could go through the exercise for at the other grades, is what do we need to be doing to, move those other students along with the students who traditionally have done well in PPS? And that's what I'm looking for in the data is, how, whatever's the secret sauce at Sitten or other places, that we have it consistently across the district and we're getting consistent positive gains in a disaggregated way for our students. And I'm concerned that I don't see that in the data, but I still see white students moving forward, kind of coming out of the pandemic and sort of picking things up and giving leaving the impression that like we're actually on our way back when I'm seeing dips in the other groups. So that was just my observation from looking at the data, and I have a lot of other questions, but I really that I've sent to Dr. Adams about looking at the special ed data and then our disaggregated data by school, because I think we all aspire to be not just better than Beaverton, no offense, not just better than Beaverton, but really like all of our students being proficient, because I look at when this schools meeting with success, one of the schools listed is Kellogg, but then when I go and look at where they are on the board goals, they actually are, they're below. When you look at the board goal measurement, they're below, or they're decreasing. And so it just seems like we've got a lot of more just digging into the data to what is working, because I've been around a long time, so I've seen every flavor. I mean, we had guaranteed viable curriculum.
We don't disagree with that.
And I think that's, oh, sorry, Dr.
No, we don't disagree with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the aggregate, we're doing well. In the disaggregate, we're not.
I guess the thing is not about if we're agreeing with it or not. What are we doing about it?
I think Dr. Proctor outlined what we were doing about it.
I mean, this is.
Well, and I think
I hear all the explanations of we're not doing this or we're doing this, we're trying to do that. I get the explanations. I understand all the stuff that we're doing. I'm just not, I haven't seen, since I've been here, I haven't seen the results of that. When I'm just looking just at the data.
I would say yet.
Yeah.
Yet.
So I guess that's the frustration, is that as we look at the data, not what we're doing, not what initiatives we have, not what strategic plans we have, not what, when we look at the data, it doesn't match up.
Sure. Yeah, and we agree with that, and I would say that we're on the same page in terms of agreement. I would say that we are immensely laser focused on the board goals, on the achievement of our different groups of students. Like, that is it. We know that that is absolutely the work, but we're very confident in terms of the sustainable practices that we are developing today, that we are working through. Like, we feel immensely confident in that. And yes, you know, we feel like the flywheel is moving, and you could see some of those pieces overarchingly. And I don't want to underscore this piece around, you know, the foundation was set, I think, with the strategic plan, the building of the graduate portrait. We had this piece right in the middle of the pandemic, which was immensely discombobulating. We are level setting again. If you read all the research around grade level standards aligned about high quality instruction materials, around tier 1 instruction, and level setting from that vantage point, those are key pieces in regards to research. And if you read the research, I was a building principal for a long time. I felt like I didn't have my building truly until year 5, because those are pieces and structures and systems that we're working to put in place. And that is happening. That absolutely is happening.
So I guess my other frustration is that while we're getting our stuff together as adults, whether it's a principal or whatever, where do that leave our kids?
Absolutely.
Right? Where do that leave our kids, right? Our kids are the ones who are having to suffer while we figure it out. Our kids are the ones who are, you know, when we look at the data or whatever, going through the grades while we're figuring it out. If you got a 3rd grade kid and you just said it took you 5 years, well, now that kid is in, 8th grade? What happens in that meantime? What happens to that kid? when do they get to a point to where we figure out where they're at and catch up? So that way, when we get to graduation, we don't have parents coming to us talking about our kids can barely read.
Absolutely. I want to say you're absolutely correct. And what I want to say also, as I, kind of get this point out in a very measured way, is that to be reminded that at the point that coming into this work, PPS in over 10 years in some content areas, in over 15 years in other content areas, had not adopted any standards-aligned curriculum. We did not have a common practice in that area. There was not a common focus in that area, and yet we are just now getting to that work. So while PPS as a system that is a part of a Portland system have not served our Black, Brown, Hispanic, Native children for decades, we are now in a position where we have shifted the practice to try something that had not been done before in 10 years, in 15 years. In coming aboard, there was not a streamlined focus on how to provide supports and professional learning for our educators. We now have a streamlined focus just in the past 2 years of how to do that work and how to make the investments in our teachers, in our schools, to support them in their practice. That did not happen in decades. So, as we continue this conversation, Pastor, pray for me. As we continue this conversation, I want to be clear that this did not start just a year ago or 2 years ago. You're right. There has been a disservice, and we have dramatically shifted just in 2 years some of those practices. And so we need, if you say what's different, that is what's different. In streamlining our focus, that is what's different. In ensuring that we have grade level standards aligned, curriculum, high quality instructional materials that is paired with professional learning for our teachers, that is what's different. When we set an instructional framework with 4 tiers that talks about grade level standards aligned, culturally affirming, data-driven, and deeply engaging, this is what we are training our teachers towards. That is what's different. It had not happened in 10 years, in 15 years. And I could attest with this team, with our superintendent, that this has been our focus, and this has been core to the work that I and everyone behind us have been doing. But that is what's different, and I'm encouraged by that. And no, we're not satisfied with the data. We're not. But I know that we're on a course that if we hold firm, we could get there.
I do have something to say, but I want to let Director Silverstein go first.
Hi. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for all of the hard work you put into all of this. It's very clear, and I just wanted to acknowledge that. And then I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this, but I guess my question kind of becomes how standardized is it? And obviously this is something that we can continue to improve. But I just know from my experiences, and this is more obviously within high school, there was a lot of frustration, I think, with the way that the curriculum was adopted. And I would say that among classes and teachers that just from what I hear from my peers and what I've seen, there isn't a lot of standardization, and I don't always know how much like teachers are following these new standards and like using the new curriculum. And I guess that just, sorry, 1 second. Sorry, I am in the middle of my school building, so a cart just passed me. But what was I saying? Okay, I guess it just makes me wonder a little bit too about like how we continue to engage with stakeholders about this, and how maybe we can continue to speak with the students and of course teachers, which it sounds like you all are doing, about how we can be more successful with this work. Yeah.
Yeah, no, so thank you. I appreciate the question. So there's a couple things that we're excited about. We started our first FACE group, Family Advisory Council on Education, who met for the first time last week and will come together every other month to talk about instructional priorities across the district. And not just there, we have a robust curriculum adoption framework that lists out all of the steps that the committee takes to make sure that they're engaging stakeholders. So from, communicating out, the opportunities to come and review curriculum, the opportunity to field test. We collect data from not only teachers, but students as well. And some of their narratives are what then leads us to the next step before we even get to presenting the curriculum for adoption before the board. We have community involved. And if we don't have a significant number of stakeholders involved in reviewing, then that means we need to go back to the drawing board. That's one of the reasons why we paused on the social studies adoption, is because we didn't have robust community and family engagement. So that's one of the ways.
Really quick. Thank you, Director Silverstein. I think you pointed out kind of one of my frustrations that I also seen as well is just, I guess where I was trying to highlight is one of the problems is not the programs you're implementing. I think they're great. Now, again, I want to second what Dr. Proctor also said. I think it is important that we stay with these programs, especially with the amount of effort and I got a taste of it, and it is really exciting stuff. But I also want to bring attention to the other side where we have schools and teachers who are on the verge or burning out, and we're trying to add something more to their plate. At some point, I think that needs to be a little bit looked at in order to make it, if you want to be successful, right? If I want someone to learn something new, they have to have the supports, they have to have the time to talk. And Dr. Armstrong would love to see that framework that you're talking about. On the other hand, I also want to, being a good scientist, in your defense, I also want to point out the other point, the other side as well. One of the issues I have with this data is that we only look at 3rd and 5th grade. And 2022's 3rd graders are today's 4th graders. And we know that the pandemic hit them at different times, right? So that means that when they went online, maybe it hurt their reading more missing out on 1st grade than missing out on kindergarten. So there's a potential that the reason we're seeing a dip is because these 3rd graders had a bigger hit in their reading development because of the timing of the pandemic. Thank you very much. Right? And so I guess that kind of leads to my question is that, is there any way we can know how they're doing in 4th grade, right? And to see, obviously they're getting smarter, so that's very difficult to measure. So I think that's one of the things I do want to also point out is that I think we do need to stay the course in terms of some of these programs that you're implementing in order to find out whether this is working or not, just because unfortunately you had to deal with the pandemic stuff.
Yeah, actually that's one.
So I guess, just one more thing really quick. It's just I guess my question is what is your ask? Like when do you think we will know that these are working for sure?
Well, that's a great question. Those are great questions, Director Wong, and appreciate your comments. about the experiences of our current third or last year's third graders across the pandemic. One of the things we're working on, as Dr. Armstrong and Dr. Proctor mentioned, is we're monitoring and evaluating what we're doing as we're doing it. We're going to be supporting our instructional coaches and principals by understanding how their teaching and learning and climate and culture Tuesdays are going. We will be doing learning walks across schools. At certain points of the year, that data will be used to inform our monitoring, but OTL staff and senior directors of school are always in schools, right? And they'll always be collecting. So we'll also have some formative data along the way. So we hope to understand the extent to which things are working, because the first thing we need to expect before we can see the ultimate changes in student achievement is we need to see change in the use of change in the practices. Are teachers using the materials? Are they able to bring them to life? Do they need more or additional professional coaching or support in order to do that? How are we building, as Dr. Franco always reminds us, collective efficacy, and what Principal Berry and Assistant Principal Martinez said tonight around our collective understanding of what we can do as a team. And so we are looking at things. I don't want there to be any misunderstanding that we wait until we have these data every year and then say, oh, that didn't work. We're constantly in schools talking to principals, inviting teacher feedback in order to understand what's working, how it's working, and the extent to which we need to offer more support.
I just want to do a follow-up to that statement, Dr. Adams. So you mentioned that we're doing constant observations and collecting that data. So I guess my question is, so from what you guys told us last year as far as the board goes and where you figure we can get to this year, we clearly didn't make that. Where were after reevaluating all the data and all the observations you guys did through this year, why do you think we didn't reach those?
That's a really great question. I think there are a multitude of factors that could be at play here. I think, one, I'm proud of a board that set robust and ambitious goals. None of us had any idea of what performance increases we could expect after a pandemic. We set performance increases based on what we know of student learning, and perhaps we're at a moment in time where that's not the rate we're going to reach right away. We're not ready to admit defeat. We still want to hold those goals up. It's why we have, and we know we need to be aligned as a school system, which is why we have each of our principals align their school improvement plan to the board goals, because those are the goals. And they're looking at their schools and the plans I know that I got a chance to look at. Those principals and school teams aligned even their increases to our increases, to the board's increases, right? And so we know that level of alignment is important. But I think there are a lot of factors that could be at play, and that's what we're trying to understand. What we're doing now this year that will be different with our observations is the entire team behind you and people who aren't even in this room will be using a common tool to collect what they're seeing in the data so that we have a centralized way to collect that information. And so that'll be one of the ways that I think we'll have more robust ongoing information about what's going on in schools, because we'll have a common tool. It's not that we didn't have a common language, but it's also nice, for me to actually have my fingers in the data. And in a way that's beyond conversations, because I do sit with Dr. Franco and his team most Mondays, so I can hear and understand the pulse of what's going on in the schools.
I just want to be clear that the board didn't set those goals. We said okay to the goals, but when we asked the number, our question was, what can we do? What is reasonable? What is acceptable? And the superintendent said, this percentage is what we can do. Our question was, what model should we be using? Should it be the OSAS data? Should it be the MAPS data, or whatever the case might be? And then the superintendent selected the model from which we would base everything off of. So I just want to be clear that we're not coming back to say, you set this goal. We accepted the goal. We accepted the matrix by which the measurement was going to be done, and then that's what was adopted. But the goal was set by the superintendent. The matrix that was going to be used was set by the superintendent. And what we said was, if this is what we can do, because the question was not, can we do 6% or 7%? We said, what can we do? What do you feel is fair? What do you feel is appropriate, given the environment that we're in, given the climate that we're in, and where everybody is at? What do you feel is the most acceptable thing to do? Because what we didn't want to do is put ourselves in a position where we come back and say, well, if it was me, I would have said 2% instead of 3% or 5%. If it was me, I would have chose the MAPS data or the OSAS data, but I was just going off of what you guys told me you wanted to do. So I just want to be very, very clear on that piece. I agree with everything that you said. It was a lofty goal. I agree with all of that, and I believe that, we didn't get where we said, and we got to figure out how to reevaluate and reassess and pivot and do whatever. The only point of clarity I want to make sure that I'm very keen on is where that information came from. That's it.
I'm curious how all the teachers are accepting the instructional coaches. Is that kind of across the board accepted, or is there some pushback?
The coaches have just been in place since teachers returned in August.
Oh.
Yeah, so we don't have, at least I'm not aware of.
We do have some data.
Oh, come on,
Yeah,
Dr.
well,
Armstrong.
no, we have data for the professional learning events that we've put on for our site-based instructional coaches and our teachers, and in all instances, our data was above 90% in terms of experience, relevance, and just, I could probably list all of the matrix. Christina Howard would probably do a better job, as she's been leading that work. But we're at 90% in all of our learning engagements with site-based instructional coaches, with principals, and with teachers when involved in work around our instructional priorities.
So that's all pretty new with the leadership teams and instructional coach and the leadership teams in the school.
Oh, absolutely, and it's our biggest, I feel like it's one of our biggest things to not only be proud of, but to move this year. We put site-based instructional coaches in all of our schools, and we were listening to what our building administrators were saying, is that we want to be able to build our learning arcs. We want to be responsive to our learning community, and we know that if we do this, we'll have higher numbers of teachers engaged in not only learning, but the use of the curriculum. And so everything that we've done this year has been about building that structure that we launched just a month ago, and the work that will play out, and what we talk about as a team almost every other week is, now how do we support that? How do we monitor it, and how do we provide the support when things go wrong? Because we know, right, we're not perfect people, and so we want to be able to respond and support principals when things happen.
Okay. That's sort of what Director Wong was talking about, I think.
And then just while I'm just talking, I just have to say, because I know we've spent some time on data about our Black students, and I know that the purpose of this was on OSAS, and there are other data points that I hope in the future the board can hear and be in celebration with the Portland community about. No, there's a team of people that are responsible for multiple pathways to graduation, and the work that happens in those schools to catch our students. While we say failure is not an option, we know some of our kids struggle. So at the same time, we also have to say that we don't give up on students. So when I think of the 650 Black students involved in CTE across 9 through 12, and seeing that out of all of those students, 91% is the graduation rate, and their average daily attendance is 80%. Now you need to know, of course, 100% is what we go for, but 80% average daily attendance is huge. We have those 650 students completing enrollments in courses. Well, there's 1,400 different enrollments. And so we have these CTE completers. There are Black students. When we want to talk about where our group is outperforming other students, we can spend a whole hour or two just talking about CTE and college and career readiness and multiple pathways to graduation and a host of other programs. And so while I appreciate the time on OSAS, there are other measures that we're using where our Black kids are excelling. And I just didn't want the night to end without dropping some positive numbers that we can all celebrate.
So I'm actually glad you said that, because that's actually one of my questions that I sent in as well. It's like, and I've been asking this question. I've asked superintendent, I've asked PAT, what other variables that we can include to evaluate the performance of our kids. I know there's more than just one, and we shouldn't be just always looking at, but for me, this is the only thing I get. Right, this is the only thing I get, so this is the only thing I can go by, right? And so, but I've been asking for that. What other things can we measure our students on besides just this? And I'm glad you said that, and I'm hoping that we can start looking at those other ways to look at how do we assess our kids. Once again, only reason why is because this is the only stuff we get. And so I think Student Director Frankie Silverstein had a question. I seen your hand up, but then I don't know if it was from the old question or not. Director DePass.
You know, I'm just,
we're gonna do two more questions. We're gonna do
I was just going to
Director
comment on what
Burnett
you just said.
Okay,
Is
and
the
then
original-
Director DePass.
The original board goals had it was designed to have the 8th grade goal be something other than just test scores. To measure some of the other things that we know our students are brilliant at. And that was something that I say in 2019, I was just looking at the resolution that was put into the 8th grade goal, and the temporary measurement that was dropped in is the one we have now. But they originally was designed to capture more than just the OSAS data and MAPS data. So
it would be great to get back to that developmental continuum, which there has been a lot of work to date on towards the graduate portrait. So what does that look like for the early grades, early learners, middle grade students, and secondary students? So that's a way that our community defines success, a vision for student success. So it'd be great to talk about the work that's been in progress there and how we're trying to orient our redesign along those attributes that we have for our students.
Director DePass, you had a question?
Thank you for hearing me out. Yeah, I think this has been a really great discussion, and I think we need to look at both, like how can we hold all of us accountable and get the results that we expect. I just wanted to shout out Director Brum Edwards and your comment about the longevity of the leadership at schools and the building principal and how important that can be. In Sitton's example, and we know we have a lot of schools that don't have that. But I want again, focus us on the both and. How can we, I'm completely frustrated with the data also, just so you know, everyone. And also wanting to believe, because I'm not an educational expert, I'm having to place 100% of my trust in what I'm hearing and the hope that I hear, and the hope for alternative measures of success. How do we measure those kids that are athletically, athletic or artistic or creative, and they're getting success that way, and balancing that with the need to the basics of, in 3rd grade, you need to be reading, at a level, and 5th grade math as markers of, future success. So I want to appreciate everyone for your comments and, on the senior leadership team, and I'm hopeful still. And I also want to figure out how we as a board can hold ourselves accountable for getting out of the way, for holding the district accountable, and also supporting the district and getting out of our own way, focusing on student outcomes 100% and not on some of the other things that we spend our time doing. And if that requires a time study, I know we've done this in the past, or a board self-evaluation, and look at actually do a time study. How do we spend our time in a week, and evaluate that against, what our board goals are. And anyway, thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Chair DePass. I just have one last question and then we adjourn. So I was looking at, I was looking at the Sitten data, the Whitman data, and the regular data. So when I was looking at for Black kids, there was no data. And so I'm just curious, how do we get to 7.5 and 13.2, but I didn't see any data on the page?
Sure, appreciate the question. The state data downloads don't provide data for a grade level when fewer than 10 students test. And so at Sitten, for example, there were 16 African American students tested across the tested grades 3 through 5, and there were not 10 students in any particular grade level at once.
Thanks. Not hearing,
Closing thoughts?
Go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that I've gotten to know a lot of school districts over the years. I think I know the majority of the superintendents pretty well that lead the larger urban districts here in America. And the question that's been resonating for me is what's different here right now at Portland Public Schools, I think, is this collection of talent in front of you, the ones sitting in the seats, the ones that are going to show up to school tomorrow morning bright and early, because I think there's what you won't always find in other school systems is a really clear alignment around the task that we have in front of us, around the desire for more equitable outcomes, around clarity around the theory of action that we're embarking on. That coherence is a rare thing. And so I just want to appreciate the team here because this is their work every single day. Results will arrive when the organization's capacity is raised, and that's the name of the game. So just want to say thank you to all our people out there.
Awesome. And I'm hoping we have the whole group for a number of many years. Meeting adjourned.